Alrighty, seeing a quorum of voting members, I call the February 10th Cincinnati School Board meeting to order. Treasurer Wagner, would you please call the attendance roll?
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Mr. Crossett?
Here.
Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Ms. Mapp?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg? Here. Vice President Bolton?
Present.
President Moffett?
Here. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our wonderful students that will be leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
Absolutely. Tonight will be led by the students from Covedale, where Mr. Michael McGowan is our principal.
Class, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Outstanding. It's a highlight of every meeting.
I agree with Vice President Bolton. That is the highlight of the day. Vice President Bolton, please explain the virtual hearing, the public process.
Thank you very much. Members of the public who are online and wish to speak during our hearing of the public this evening may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your requests for 5 minutes. If you would like a direct response to your questions, please make sure to share your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information.
Thank you. The chair will now entertain a motion and a second to approve the February 10th business meeting agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Board Member Crossett, second.
Second.
Thank you, VP Bolton. Treasurer Wagner, please call the voting roll.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes, tonight's agenda is approved as posted. Superintendent Murphy, please update us about your goals and the evaluation review.
All right, happy to do so. The last time I think we talked, there were 5 goals in what I would consider the instructional realm of the state superintendent standards in Ohio. I was asked to place additional goals in the other 4 categories: vision, continuous improvement, communication and collaboration, 3rd, policies and governance, and then 5, resources. And so those are posted for your pleasure and your feedback at this time. In addition to that, Mr. Crossett is going to help me out because he has created a scoring guide around those goals, considering the weighting that the policy committee has asked us to have in order to move forward.
Board members, do you have any questions, feedback, need for clarification?
If it's all right, I would like to walk through this spreadsheet that I created. It's really sort of an extension of what Board Member Lindy had sort of suggested and talked about a little bit. So if you actually go to this first page, I had it graded 1 through 5, which is kind of in sync with our state report card kind of grading. And you can see this identifies the 60% part of the scoring related to the outcome goals, and then 10% related to the check-in, and 30% related to the 5 state standards. And this is sort of a hypothetical example of how the scoring would work and how it could roll up. But if you go to page 2, if you can scroll, if you flip it over to, I guess you got to flip it over to page 2. Yeah. So this is looking at the 60% scoring for the student annual report card. And so if you look at here's the 5 goals, and I've got highlighted if you're at 100% of the goal and then the base of the goal. And so the growth goal, which is A minus B, which is in that column pretty far to the right, that's kind of what I would think we would be measuring on. And I think Ben was kind of suggesting if we could get, some percentage of the way towards that, reaching that goal, that would qualify for some sort of a score for 1 through 5. So I kind of put together this chart. So in other words, if the goal is, our original goal was 61%, the superintendent stretched the goal to 63%. I kind of felt like those stretch goals should be worth a little bit extra since I felt it was like moving the goalposts after the middle of the game, but we all might have a different opinion about that, but that's just a suggestion of how it might look. And so as we get going towards that goal, if you get 85% of the way in the growth, then that might be worth a 4. If you get 75% of the way, that might be worth a 3. And this is just a suggestion, and it's just a way to calculate these numerically to kind of put something for the superintendent to be evaluated on. So any questions about this part of this? And then I'll go to the first page, the front page. Yeah, Ben.
So let me start. The board members have questions around the goals that the superintendent has updated at the request of the board. And then we're going to go to your addition, Mr. Crossett. Board Member Lundy.
Yeah, I think I can do them both together because I think a lot of the questions I had about how the goals were written would be answered if this is the approach that we adopt. I was initially really worried that we're listing the instructional goals fourth, as if they're the fourth most important thing we're doing around here, when I think improving academic opportunity for children is the most important thing after keeping kids safe. And so in reading this proposed scoring guide, what's really nice about this, and I do really appreciate this and I like this, it's super clear that the academic progress of the district makes up the lion's share of the evaluation. I think that's entirely appropriate and great, and I want to say thank you. I think I do want to raise again my concern that the targets on the academic improvement are too low. I want to say just a bit about this. I know I shared an email with Phyllis, who's passed it on to the rest of the board. This was a week or two ago, and everybody's had a chance to see it now. But I wanted to have some context for how high we should be aiming with the academic goals for the superintendent. And I really want them to have meaning. And so to have a better informed opinion about that, I went back and looked at the data from the Ohio Department of Education and the Workforce and looked at all schools in Ohio, or at least the districts that serve let's say, the lion's share of students are economically disadvantaged, like CPS, and looked to see over the last 3 years, so not any 1 year, but really a 3-year average, how much improvement year over year are those districts seeing? And so in this goal, for example, if we were to go from 61% passing third grade reading to 63% passing, that's a 2 percentage point increase. I wanted to know, is that big? Is that small? Is that kind of average as you look at districts across Ohio? And what the data helped me see was that if we're making 2 percentage points of progress, that's actually in the bottom half of districts serving almost entirely low-income students in the state of Ohio. I think we should be much higher than that. I think we should set our sights to be in the top 25th percentile for improvement across the state of Ohio. And so I want to just sum up by saying 2 things. Again, I really appreciate the scoring guide. I fully support every piece of this and think it is great. And the push I would offer is I think we need to be setting higher targets, because if our goal is to be in the bottom half, I don't think that goal is high enough.
So thank you, Board Member Lundy. Board Member Crossett?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think the timing's important, and I think the timing of when we look at that and reset the goals would best be right after the report card comes out. And we're many months into the school year now, and I don't disagree that we should aim high. So that's just my opinion. So,
Board Member Lundy.
Thank you, and I'll stop talking after this. I think, to Mr. Cross's point, there is an aspect of that is deeply reasonable, that you come in the middle of the year, you have more modest target. I think the challenge I'm having with that is that many of my colleagues made the case that the reason why we didn't need a search process and the reason why we could hire a new superintendent from the floor in what was a great surprise to me was the incredible job the superintendent had been doing in the first half of the year. If that is true, I think there's even less of a reason for us to set a target that is to be in the bottom half of schools for academic improvement. I think that's an even stronger reason to say this bar needs to be high. And so that's the point that I want to emphasize. Thanks.
Board Member Craig.
Let me start by saying thank you for taking the feedback that we gave to you at the retreat and implementing it into your goals. I think, again, I sent you a message directly saying thank you for that, and I think I'd want to say it on the floor here so that folks can hear it. Because I do think this is ultimately how we are going to build a collaborative set of goals for which we would hold you accountable and for which you would hold yourself accountable. So I appreciate that. I think ultimately this year is going to be a difficult year anyway, just because of the nature of when we're starting the process to do the evaluation, and also just in general, us figuring out what this looks like. We're not starting this at the beginning of the school year. We're starting this kind of past the halfway point of a school year. So I do think that's an opportunity. And then you gave some definitive things within each of the markers to be things for us to look at and see whether or not those things were successful. Those things ultimately led to the district being in a better spot. And so I just wanted to say thank you for doing that. And, again, what the exact way we score it, I'm not as hard pressed on how we come up with that scoring mechanism. I think as long as we have one that makes sense and is reasonable. This first year, this is kind of we're figuring it out on the run. I think in future years, this would be an opportunity for us to come up with a more concrete methodology for future years so that we are able to kind of have something consistent each year so that you're not being judged in a different way every year, right? You may have different goals, you may have different things that we need to work on as a district, you may have different focus, but we don't necessarily need to have different ways of figuring out how we measure your success. So I appreciate you doing the work there, and just kind of look forward to us getting this solidified so that we can actually give you the expectations and you can have an opportunity to, perform.
Board Member Matt.
Yes, so thank you, Superintendent Murphy, for providing more context to the state standard goals that you are expected to be evaluated on. I do have just a little bit of a critique with some of the goals. I know that it was our recommendation for them to be SMART goals, and I know that there's a presentation of some elements of the SMART goals there. For me, I would like to see more concretely what those specific outcomes you're anticipating from these said inputs would be. So if we're talking about communication, what would be the measurable there? What would we as a district expect to see in terms of the growth with communication from these different interventions put in place? So I would like to see that type of SMART goal approach woven throughout the rest of the goals that you have. So I see some elements there, but I think it can be strengthened. But I do appreciate that you've provided some type of context so that we know what areas you're trying to focus on to obtain those goals. And then to Board Member Crossett, thank you for helping to move this work forward, to provide some solution, right, to help us do the work of effectively evaluating the superintendent. So I appreciate this.
I didn't know if you wanted me to go over the front page. Would that be helpful for everybody? If you can get that back on the screen there.
Sure. The scoring rubric. The spreadsheet. the front page.
So if you, at the very beginning of this, you'll see there in that column under the 60%, those scores come from the previous page. So they just carry forward. And then we've got 10% of the scoring related to check-in. So I don't know if we'll check in Q2 or Q3. It was just a suggestion. And what I thought we could do there is we could have a discussion and kind of, as a group, come up with what we think would be a score as a group. But if we can't, we can also each vote individually and just take our average score. And that just, it facilitates an average score on each of those moments. And then for the standards, I think, going back to Kendra's point, those SMART goals that get developed for those standards, I think would be part of a discussion. And again, Superintendent Murphy asked that we get one score from the whole board. So a way to facilitate that, if we can't come to an agreement and discussion, is just for each of us to make our own score and have it be an average. And so that's just, and then, it's just a matter of calculating that out on the spreadsheet to come up with the total score. So I hope that seems reasonable, at least initially, a reasonable methodology of how to do this.
So, Vice President Bolton.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the superintendent, and thank you to Mr. Lindy and previous conversations and pushing the evaluation piece for these number of months and years. Appreciate it. I have just several questions on this. On measuring how well we're doing or the young people are doing or not doing, is the test that we're using, is this the state report card test?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. We all know, I think, how I feel about their assessment. But at least it's something it's happening statewide, so it makes sense to use it. For this, why is a particular number a stretch goal? I mean, that's what the superintendent raised.
I just didn't know exactly how to deal with it. It doesn't have to be the way to deal with it, but the superintendent actually created goals for herself that were beyond the goals that were set, that were existing back in September, October, when the report card came out.
So the stretch is what's been raised, and that means what was there was the base expectations we had of the superintendent?
So initially, the direction to me from the board was to utilize our strategic plan and our goals and guardrails. I pulled these goals directly from the board-approved goals and guardrails. I didn't change anything. I didn't think I had the liberty to do that, so I didn't. But then the feedback I received the last time was that, this was after the meeting in an email, that, just to Mr. Lindy's point, they were not rigorous enough in comparison to other students who are economically disadvantaged in our state. So in a good faith effort to consider the email he shared, I made an adjustment, I thought, following what his suggestion was. The concern for me around this is it's outside of what I was originally asked to do. 2, it really gives me less than 30 school days to accomplish. 3, everyone else who is working on these kind of goals, they have agreements that don't allow me to change what we have agreed to as their goals. So I'm doing this in isolation with 30 school days left when you consider the state test is the week after spring break, so the beginning of April. So if you think about where we are right now with the number of school days available. So as I talked through this with Mr. Crossett, trying to understand the scoring system, we thought if we kept the base from the strategic plan, from the goals and guardrails, that could be one measure. But to satisfy the thought that this is looking at us being in the bottom 25% of the state, which is not what I created, we named them stretch goals. So it considers where we are with the goals and guardrails and where we've been over the last couple of years, but it also takes into account this 60% measure to follow the current board policy. So that's where those numbers are coming from. So the base from third grade reading essentially was 47.5, according to our goals and guardrails. My goal was 61, which is in parentheses, which is based on what the goals and guardrails call for. The stretch is in this blue, 63%, which takes into account we weren't growing fast enough. But this has changed on me after 9 months of work. So that's where we are.
So the base numbers is what we had expected before.
This is where we
some of
started 2 years ago, I would say, when the goals and guardrails were written.
So we were lower, our expectations were lower
Yes, ma'am.
last year, year before,
Oh, yeah. Yes.
on at least some of these or all of the, okay. I just was unclear about the stretch goals and the base piece. For the evaluation, I don't know if this is part of the policy. Will there be opportunity for any commentary in the evaluation document? I know we've lived through that issue before. I didn't know, have we made arrangements that the evaluation would include any commentary from board members or not? Just so it'll be strictly a scoring survey piece?
So I think that question should go to someone in the policy committee.
If I'm not mistaken, and previous committee members, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that additional feedback or commentary would be encompassed in the 10%, as we are expecting to do like regular check-ins, as well as the 30%, where we're able to continue to have that dialogue with the superintendent along the way. So the 60% is mostly those measurables, whereas the other aspects of the percentages, and it does include that commentary that you're speaking about. And the surveys, not only from, us, but from other constituents within the district.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Were you done?
No, I mean, just, but the verbal will be verbal, and it will not be necessarily publicly shared.
Board Member Lindy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. I know I've talked before, and I think I may have genuinely misread some of this, having heard the superintendent's most recent comments, and I would just like to check, because if I did misread it, I can walk back some of what I said earlier, and if I did read it correctly, then I can just, stay where I was. But I think, Superintendent, I think I misinterpreted what those numbers were in parentheses.
Yes, sir. And I think you missed the last conversation, but this is in direct response to the email you sent right after.
Yeah,
I don't want to mess up the dates.
It's okay.
So I was trying to respond to your suggestion.
I appreciate it. Part of what gets so confusing about this is that the from numbers, I think, date back to when the board approved the original goals and guardrails.
So they were spaced out over periods of years.
Right. I
So
think
that's
that,
correct. So on time for this year would have been the 61%. But what I
Right.
heard you,
please.
what I heard you say, I don't know if it was the last board meeting or not, but I heard you say previously, no, not heard you say, but in an email was you were questioning the rigor. So I looked at the calculation that you shared in that email, and I tried to align that calculation so that it would better meet your expectation.
And I want to say thank you. I really appreciate this. I think part of what gets so confusing about the way these, and this is not something that you did, it's just an artifact of these having been around now for a couple of years. But if we just take the first bullet, where it says the percentage of third graders proficient in reading will increase from 47.5%. I get confused because that's where we started a couple years ago. If we look at last year's report card, we were at 57%. And so I was misreading the number you had in parentheses. But if you're saying here that, gosh, we finished on last year's report card at 57%, and you'd like us to move from 57% to 63% this year, I think that feels quite ambitious. I'd even be willing to entertain a lower number.
Well, let's do a lower number.
No, but I think, and I think.
It's still not good, it's
Well,
still
no,
not
no,
good.
but I think, this is why I think the data can be so helpful, truly. Because I think to say that we're going to do something that has never been done before sounds great, but it's really hard to hold somebody accountable for doing something that's never been done before. And so the reason I shared those numbers was that we could see what would it mean to be in the top quartile. It would mean about 4 percentage points of improvement. And so what you've proposed here is, I think, even more than that. It's certainly fine with me. I think if I just zoom out for a second, I know I was coming across very directly before. It's because I was very worried that we were modeling a lowering of expectations for children. I don't want us to do that. I'm very, very grateful that there's been an effort to raise the bar since the first conversation we've had. And really, I just want to say thank you for that. And I want to say thank you to Mr. Crossett for the modeled scoring guide, which I think is quite clear and quite helpful. I'm happy to be wrong on any of those things and take feedback from others, but I wanted to walk back and say
So I
thank
can
you.
move that down to 62%?
It's
Okay.
going to be what we vote on, but I think anything that would put us in that top quartile is something I think we should be proud of.
I did read your email. I did respond, so happy to respond.
Vice President Bolton?
Yeah, I'm glad we're getting some of this cleared up, and I think it's great to be moving forward on all of this. But I appreciated Mr. Lindy's selection of the cohort of comparison based, I think it was about economically challenged or what have you, as a cohort. I tried to look at some of those districts, and the only thing I would say is that it's so crazy when the state tries to figure out who our peers are. I never quite understand the lists that they create. But the poverty piece, to me, is not the tell-all regarding a cohort. In many of those districts, you may have significant poverty, you may have significant economic disadvantage, but one of the problems that I think the challenges that we face is the diversity within our population. And if you talk in terms of second language, or you talk in terms of students with disabilities, those are the kinds of things when it comes to testing that actually start to drive your numbers over a pretty rocky road. So I think that it would be great if somebody statistically could actually come up with some truer cohorts that we could measure ourselves against, because I really don't like the ones the state's choosing. And I know that the poverty piece is not enough of a comparison, because poverty is not necessarily the issue. It's the challenges that certain kids have regarding actually taking tests and scholarship and achievement initially on a standardized test. So it'd be great to find, make it an assignment. Let's try to find some cohorts that actually kind of replicate our situation in our student population.
So I'm going to just comment, my comment first, and then we can go back around again. I think that I want to say thank you to Superintendent Murphy for trying to take into account all 7 people's varying opinions. One thing that I think we can agree on, although we may come at it a different way, is that even whether it's 47.5% or 63% or 61%, we have significant work to do for our students within this district to move it. I appreciate the aggressive intention, and I think that is one of the reasons why I believed that we could make you the permanent superintendent, because I think that is what is needed, is to be aggressive. I have said before, when we talked about goals and guardrails last year and the year before, we're talking about low numbers, and that should not be acceptable by to anyone within this district. I do have concerns that we're changing your goals midstream, and the entire other administrative team has different numbers. So to my colleagues, I think we need to give that some consideration. Perhaps we need to be consistent for the remainder of this year, and then have ambitious goals, like maybe we can have the target be in parentheses and the original goal that is consistent with the remainder of the district be what the target is, and then leave the higher numbers for ambitious intent to be for next year upon review of where we end up landing, and maybe they can change, but they could be a baseline for the future. But I think that consistency across the district would be my suggestion. I also would like to ask my colleagues a little bit. I'm going to say this, and this is not in defense of the superintendent, but as a board member, I'm a little confused about the scoring rubric and how we got here with regard to the numbers. Because when I look at the superintendent evaluation from 2022 and 2023, we had student achievement be 10%. Communication was 10%. We had percentages, and we're now switching to a 60% for the standards. And while I agree that that should be a lot, I think we're not consistent amongst ourselves, which I think, again, leads the superintendent to be kind of all over around providing for us what we want. I'm not clear on where surveys come into place or board member comments come into place. I think that should be weighted, and I don't quite understand where that falls. So that's also to my colleagues on the policy. I am a little confused with how this all weighs out with regard to, in totality, how we are evaluating the superintendent. In part to my new colleagues, because I'm a little confused, because we've had changes for so many years, and it was a percentage, and I just am confused. So I think that we need to get a little bit more clarity amongst ourselves before we impart that on you. You've definitely tried to raise the bar, and I'm appreciative. I think 63%, but I would like for it to be achievable and realistic. But most importantly, I want it to be consistent with what the remainder of the leadership team is having to do. So I'm going to suggest that maybe we put the original targets as the goal, and then put the higher numbers as a parenthesis to reach, if so. But I don't know how my colleagues feel about that.
Well, if you look at what I've proposed here, the original targets are worth a score of 5.
Okay.
If the stretch goals are achieved, it's a 6. It's worth more. There's a bonus in there. So I feel like I've kind of accommodated your concern already a little bit. It may not be what the rest of the board agrees to, but that's something that I just suggested.
And your suggestion was for this year to do it that way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is the policy is also supposed to be looking at a 3-year trend. It's not just every year individually. And so obviously looking back 3 years is different superintendents, but that is also something to be incorporated as we go into the future and set goals. It's not just make it or break it in 1 year. It's supposed to look over a period of years to look for a trend. That's another component of this review that should be, if we have another COVID or if we have an economic crisis, those things could affect the student outcome that beyond the control of the school district.
Thank you. Board Member Craig?
So can I just maybe make a suggestion, because I think we've been on this for somewhere close to 40 minutes now, and I don't think we're going to get any closer to getting to a final this way. That I think the superintendent's received some feedback on the actual goals themselves that certainly can be modified or adjusted, and that there's a formula that's been proposed, and again, maybe that's something that can be modified and adjusted, but that could be something we task someone with and as an assignment to bring back to the board for our next meeting, rather than spending more time tonight going back and forth on the different parts of it. Because I just, quite honestly, there's a lot of stuff that we have to do on the agenda, and there's a lot of stuff that we are trying to get to. And I think if we spend 50 minutes every time talking about the superintendent's goals, while that's maybe great and helpful, we're not getting her a goal that we're going to judge her on. And it may not be something that's perfect, and it may not be something all of us necessarily always agree on, but I think we owe it to her, because we are more than 2 months late for what we said we would do. And so I just maybe propose that we assign that to someone, or assign it to a collective of a couple board members to work on whatever the formula might be, and allow the superintendent to work to modify that last modification there and be presented at the next board meeting for us to kind of then at that point vote on. Because I just think we can keep doing this every meeting, but it's not necessarily the most productive way to do it.
Thank you. I'm going to let the chair, or are you the chair of policy? Okay, I think we should have tasked this to your committee, but let you have the last word on this.
And if we need to move to closure, I understand I'm not going to win every vote. We can call a vote, we can get it done. We're going to revisit this again in the fall, like in 6 months. So I think in terms of moving forward, I want to support what Mr. Craig was saying. I wanted to go back for a second to what Ms. Bolden was saying. I just wanted to hear more about what you meant when you said it's not so much the poverty level as it is the diversity of the students.
Quickly.
Very quickly, when you look at the testing piece, poverty obviously is a general condition, general part of the cohort that has been used. But when you're looking at whether or not young people can take particular tests, or whether or not they get special dispensation, or in the state of Ohio don't get special dispensation because of their particular learning disabilities, which is the case with our state tests on the state report card, or whether or not they are English language learners, those things tend to drive down their ability to achieve on a particular test, more so than necessarily the condition of poverty.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think the thing I wanted to say, and I want us to be really careful of, is I think it can, and I'm not saying this is what you were saying, Ms. Bolden, but sometimes when I hear people say it's not so much about the economic, it's about the diversity of the students, it can feel super racist, and that we have different expectations for white low-income students than low-income students of color. And again, I'm not saying that's what you were saying. I just want to be really clear that as a board, I hope this is true, we think we can do important and powerful things with all of our students. And I wanted to just make sure I said that out loud. Thank you.
And as we say at least twice a year between the two of us in this conversation, you're right, that's not the issue. The issue is taking tests. If you have particular learning disabilities, or if your language is not first English on the Ohio tests, that's going to have more of an impact on the achievement of the total than necessarily whether or not young people are in poverty.
Okay, I'm going to stop this discussion. I think the superintendent has more than enough information and thoughts from the board members. We will probably have to pick this up again. I'm going to move down. Board members Craig and Crossett, please update us about the treasurer search.
So, board members met with and interviewed 3 candidates. And after thorough interview with each of the 3, we have narrowed it down to 2. So those 2 will be interviewed on the 19th. And with the goal of selecting a person to become our new treasurer. And so the hopes is that we would have someone selected that would give us enough of a runtime to allow them to work with our current treasurer and be able to onboard, get them up to speed, that we would be having them here in a time frame that also allow them to start working, so to be able to fast move through future work on future budgets. So right now, it's just we got 2 folks that we're going to meet with on the 19th.
Do board members have any questions? Vice President Bolden.
Could we share with the public their opportunity to participate, or when does that play into the selection?
So what we did decide to do is since the treasurer's role is such a unique role in that it's so heavily connected to how school financing and school funding works, we did establish 2 groups to kind of be participatory, to give us feedback, who would have a kind of a more connected relationship to our budget and how a district budget works. So we had members of our audit committee, as well as members of the staff for the treasurer's office as one group, and then also an invitation, if it hasn't already gone out, would be going out to our labor leaders to invite them to also participate in the process to be able to give feedback to both candidates. And then the board would have additional time to ask any other follow-up feedback to those follow-up questions we might have with regard to the candidates. And, again, I think our hope and our dream is that we will have, great opportunity to hear from the feedback from our audit committee folks and our labor union folks as to their thoughts and ideas around each candidate, and that would help fuel our understanding and help us make a clear decision.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members have questions? All right, moving on. Do board members have any acknowledgments or announcements? Board Member Weinberg.
Yes, so if we could all look at the screen. Dun, dun, dun. I'll wait till the picture is up before I get started. Okay. So I would like to take a quick moment to give early kudos and a congratulations to President Moffitt for being named the recipient of the 2025 OSBA Training Award. And this training award is part of the STAR Awards, in which it represents service, training, aptitude, and recognition. And this is given by the Ohio School Board Association. Hold on, I'm not done. Let me get it all out first. It's given by the Ohio School Board Association. The award, it reflects one's true commitment to public education, their role as a school board member, and only 41 out of 3,400 board members will receive the recognition, and she will be receiving it on March the 6th. So let's give her a big round of applause. So early congratulations. And that's all that I have for today.
And I did not send my picture in, but I wanted to say thank you so much to Mr. Beck and the North Avondale AI Club, because they taught me about AI. There was some, I think, a former board member, Melanie Bates' grandson was in there, and they were super excited to teach me about AI and what I needed to know. So I'm planning on going back again, but we had a great time. So thank you. And I think there are multiple AI clubs within our district, but that one invited me out, and so I want to make sure I say thank you. Vice President Bolton.
Yes, thank you very much. One of the pleasures that I have being on the board is being appointed to the Recreation Commission as a representative of the district. And just wanted to announce, this is a pretty big deal within the state of Ohio and nationally as well. The Governor's Management Innovation Award for 2024 went to the Cincinnati Recreation Department and Commission for their Rec at Night program, which occurred on Saturday nights throughout the summer for our young people in many of our recreation centers. It was every Saturday night throughout the entire summer, providing safe, inclusive spaces, plenty of activities, and indeed the best press that I think teenagers have gotten in a long time throughout the summer. It was a great opportunity for the kids and for the grown-ups that gave their Saturday nights, part of the recreation team that does a great job. But this award is very important, and indeed is being recognized now nationally as something wonderful for our young people, especially our kids who often get such a bad rep in the press and such worry about gathering. They had great times, and congratulations to the rec people.
Board Member Rapp.
Yes, I want to extend a kudos to Dr. Manisha House, who's the Director of Positive School Culture, for really taking the lead to just make sure that the social and emotional wellness is woven throughout our district and that this is becoming a part of our culture. I was so excited to attend the graduation for the juvenile detention center because that was the first graduation that was hosted, and to see the students, the graduates, feeling really proud and accomplished, and also also for the staff to be excited to have a different framework and model to follow, which is the PBIS framework. And so it has really reframed their way of thinking about restorative practices and working with our students. And so I was just so grateful to see that. And then also I had the opportunity to just see in action after leaving our policy committee meeting last week, to see our custodians, to see our security, to see those that are working in food services, to be informed about trauma-informed care, to be informed about how to support our students because they interface with our students on a regular basis, and to see the energy and the excitement about having the tools to support our students and provide that safe and healthy culture. So I just want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Manisha House, in addition to her team. And lastly, I'll just say, just seeing the facilitators, our counselors, our social workers leading the charge, it was an amazing thing to see.
And I did forget to say that our Department of Student Services had a workforce open house. That was awesome. So thank you for all the work that they're doing too. Superintendent Murphy, do you have any announcements and
Yes.
retirements?
Yes, one retirement today from a teacher from Mount Washington School, Ms. Patricia M. Akes, is retiring. Congratulations to her. And then I have, I believe, 3 kudos I do want to share. So the first goes to student Sonia Mumal. She's a 9th grade cellist who placed second at the Sphinx Organization Music Competition. This is a national competition that brings together the top students from across the country. Congratulations to her. And the Rothenberg Spelling Bee, oh my goodness, it was so much fun. It was a packed house, lots of parents, lots of community members. On January the 29th, they had their annual spelling bee, and we want to offer a congratulations to student LaDaniel Blayton. He won first place. And then this last one, I want to give a deep appreciation to everyone who is a part of the Office of School and Community Partnerships. Last week, we hosted a partner refresh meeting at the 1819 building. It was a packed house, extremely well attended. Thank you to the board members who were able to come out. It was really, really refreshing to see them and to be able to host them for that morning. Thank you.
Vice President Bolton, the chair is yours to please conduct our hearing of the public.
Thank you very much. We are now at the item of our agenda for hearing the public. Each speaker will have 2 minutes and will address all comments to the presiding officer. If you're online, once a request to speak has been granted, you'll be invited to enter. You should click on the camera icon to go interactive. Provide your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you'd like a response to any questions you might have. This request is consistent with board protocol, and we appreciate your help. In the unusual event that someone is not willing to follow this protocol, we reserve the right to end the person's time online. Again, each person will have 2 minutes to speak. When the timer goes off, your time is up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel matters. After speaking, if you're online, you'll briefly see the welcome screen again as you transition back to the live stream meeting. Finally, we ask that your public commentary be respectful of all listeners. Thank you very much. And I have no cards in front of me.
Do we have anyone online, Rob?
Chair Bolton, we have 2 online speakers today.
And
Do we have
no
any
cards.
in person?
We have no in-person speakers today.
Wow.
Great.
Okay.
Want me to read it again? I'll try to.
All right, our first speaker is going to be Herschel Daniels. Herschel, you can unmute your camera and microphone, and we will start your time.
I'm trying to unmute well, I'm unmuted. There I am.
You're ready
Okay,
to go.
I'm ready to go. All right. I want to thank the board for this time and the presiding officer. On December 17th, as I wrote the board and told you I was going to re-engage into the Cincinnati Public Schools after being absent for over a decade. I was a LSDMC member when you were doing the billion-dollar build. And so I'm coming back as part owner of a company, Herschel Daniels Jr. LLC, under board policy where you invited business partnership. So when I wrote to you on December 17th and the follow-up in January through the superintendent who convened starting an investigation of what we proposed, let me say that I'm part of an 800-member coalition that has created an $88 billion agreement with PNC Bank. I sent you the information in the background. And that we're going to be meeting on March 25th in Washington, D.C., over 1,200 of us. Cincinnati Public Schools, in my mind's eye, because I'm a grandfather and my family has a vested interest with over 30, 40 kids in CPS to make it the best. So we've got a Wall Street broker is going to issue the letter of commitment. We're looking to follow up with you and the superintendent's investigative team. As an ex-LSDMC member, I'm sorry to have missed the event, but my wife's brother just died. And so we've been consumed by dealing with that. We look forward to coming to you. The World Conference of Mayors has supported this, National Policy Alliance, the National Black Chamber of Commerce, Ohio.
Thank you. That is time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jennifer Myrie of the NAACP. Jennifer, go ahead. Your mic is muted.
I'm sorry, I'll start again. Good evening, CPS School Board President Moffitt, members of the board and CPS leadership. My name is Jennifer Myrie, and I am the Education Committee Chair for the Cincinnati NAACP. David Whitehead is our president. Happy Black History Month. The NAACP scholarship is now open. This scholarship, 2025. This scholarship is only available for Cincinnati Public Schools. We are seeking students who have at least a 2.5 GPA and complete the application by March 30th. The scholarships are named after Cincinnati activists like Wendell P. Dabney, Juanita Adams, Carla S. Irvine, and Charles Rock. The AXO competition is also accepting applications. AXO was founded in 1978 by author and journalist Vernon Jarrett. AXO inspires Black students to expand their horizons and sharpen their skills, from performing to culinary arts to science and technology, engineering, and math and STEM. Students can demonstrate their talents in up to 3 competitions. Information about the scholarship and AXO can be found at Cincinnati NAACP.com. I've named individuals who supported the Black community and left a legacy of their commitment. I urge you to continue two-way conversation with the Black community to leave a legacy that the district is truly here for kids. Thank you.
Okay, Superintendent Murphy, please present the 2025-26 school calendar.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I think General Counsel Hoying is going to join me in this conversation. We are bringing this calendar back to you. You had previously approved it. However, current administration and others sought some clarification around language that was used in the calendar that had been just slightly different from what we had used in the past. And so we wanted to be able to speak clearly about the calendar to all constituent groups. And so we're asking you for your review and approval of this updated calendar.
Would you be able to describe what has changed, like to summarize what the difference is between year to year that you're submitting for?
Absolutely. So initially, for one area is during the summer, we did not have summer school considered. And then there were a few other areas around whether something was a professional day. And I don't know, Dan, if you can help me with the specifics on that part.
Previously it was based on days. It's now an hours requirement for the full year. That's right. The only thing I'd add is that under 3313.48, the board has to approve calendars, which is why we're bringing it to you. It's to be shared with the board at least 30 days, in a public hearing at least 30 days before the vote on the approval of the calendar. It also has to be shared with our private parochial non-pub schools in the district, which we also will be sharing it with them.
And one other thing, Madam President, I think it's accurate, we moved back the start of school
By a week.
a week. Yes,
Moved it up?
moved it later in August.
Okay. Do board members have any questions? Board Member Weinberg?
Yes, for my particular question, if you can go up to January or go down to, yes, right there. I just wanted to make sure, so for the 5th, it's a district PD day, meaning
Yes.
are we starting on the 6th?
Yes, we would be starting on Tuesday, the 6th. The rationale behind that is we had that date this year later in the month, but we thought it would be less disruptive to families if we just kept those dates from the break together, as opposed to then they have to find another.
Right, no, absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other, Board Member Matt?
Yes, I think this was included on the previous calendars, but I think it would be helpful if possible if we were able to include like the testing window, the
Yes.
state testing window to the calendar, just for our edification as well as for families.
Yes. And then there's one more thing on here for the board to just make sure we're highlighting. The change in pushing us, having a later start in August means that we'll be coming back to school after Memorial Day, and we have not had that in a few years.
You said that. So Memorial Day is May the 25th, and we would be coming back, that's Tuesday, Wednesday, and then the kids would be out on the 28th?
The quarter would end on the 28th, so we would have children, and then we would not on the 29th. That would be a teacher workday. So it'd still be the month of May, but.
Board Member Weinberg?
So I did not realize, excuse me, that fell on that date. What was the rationale for putting school a week later versus what it was last year's calendar and the year before that?
We felt that coming back in on the 6th, or I guess it would have been the 5th, this year didn't give us enough time to prepare, to have the professional development, to allow teachers time to set up their classrooms. And this is a return to what we have most recently had in the last several years. This year was an exception. I don't know the rationale for that, but this will give us more time to prepare to open school.
So even with the late, the earlier start time, does it still mean that, could we still push up the end of the school a week before versus the week later?
It's a later start in August than what
So
we
we're
had
moving
this
down
year.
to the 20, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So because of the later start?
Yes.
Could we still somehow move it back to the, before Memorial Day?
So that is 3 school days.
I'm just curious if students are going to still come to school after that date of having the holiday. That's just my concern. I'm going
We
to put
have
it out
done
there.
that before. We have had
don't
that
remember.
before. It's been a moment.
Do you remember what year that was? I'm just curious.
I don't remember the year.
I'm thinking
It was
not the
even
last
while
4
I was a high
years.
school principal, so it's been a while. But you know, the principals don't come back until like the 1st of August,
Right.
so it just makes things a little more challenging if we left it earlier in the month of August.
Thank you.
Yes,
Board Member
ma'am.
Craig.
Just wanted to stress the fact that I think when we had this discussion last time, there was the conversation between trade-offs. And so the trade-offs were, you start the year earlier and you may not have people at the first days of class. And it also puts us in positions where things like bus transportation and these other things, you're giving a lesser time to resolve some of those issues that may be coming up in those first weeks of school. Or we get out earlier, which we recognize and appreciate the fact that some students, families may make trips and plans around Memorial Day. I distinctly know that I was in school past Memorial Day because my diploma has a June date on it.
Yeah.
So it is not like we've never done school that goes into it. And it's not like we're the only school district that will go past Memorial Day. In fact, several school districts, even locally, go well into June. So I don't think that's as big a concern for me. I wanted to make sure that we had, and I think it was a lot of hard work to do this originally, and a lot of good work being done to update some things, but just making sure that we gave consideration to a lot of the factors. I know last time, one of the things that was discussed was trying to ensure that we didn't hit on holidays, we didn't hit on these type of things, so that important days or days that were valuable to folks because of their needs may not conflict. And so I just wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to speak to a little bit to that.
Yes, we took all of those things into consideration. The committee took all of those things into consideration. I think this still leaves us 2 weeks at the winter break for families who do things together at that time. It still leaves a full spring break just about at the end of March for families. And it also still honors the week at Thanksgiving. I remember when we used to be in school till Wednesday, and then people would disappear on Tuesdays. So it still honors that that entire week around the holiday seasons.
Board Member Matt.
Yes. Can you just speak to how the additional hours are built in, since it's not focused on the number of days, but it's, recommended by hours? So can you speak to how we've included that in there?
Yeah, so this is basically a translation, a calculation of the days that we would have, and we've been well over the minimums that we needed to have, and so we've had to then change it to the hourly calculation. So same number of days each school year. So you'll see at the top, well, about midway down, the student days in the fall, 171, the teacher days, 191, which meets the standard, and then we just translate it into the number of hours.
Okay. I didn't know if it had anything to do with how much, by extending it out another week, if that impacted the.
We're in really, really great shape.
Board Member Lindy.
Thank you. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I would just like to see us approve it as soon as we possibly can, so that families can plan for next year. Am I right in hearing we can't do that tonight? It's got to be out for 30 more days?
So we'll submit it for your approval on the 17th, but we talked about unless there's objection from the board, posting it on our website as a proposed, so families can see what the calendar looks like now, or
That's
after
great.
this meeting.
That's great. My motivation is to try to get info to parents as soon as we can.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
We talked about having it be like a draft until it's voted on, and then it'll stay final.
To be approved on
Yes.
March 6th, 17th.
Yes. And I'm gonna just add that I might be old, but I remember June dates where we were in school in June. Some of us have forgotten conveniently, but we went to like June 10th, June 9th. I mean, it's okay for kids to be in school in June. So yes, I think this is great. Any other questions from board members? Okay.
Thank you.
So, who is presenting the resolution? We don't have a date down here. Someone from policy. the resolution for the filing of the 21 original Board of Revision complaints as authorized by the Hamilton County.
I'm happy to provide a very brief summary, though I think our general counsel is also very well positioned to share a
Okay.
short update on that.
Dan, we'll have you come back up and give some explanation. Is this the properties filing resolution?
Thank you. So the policy committee has been, as we consider policies, the committee's been asked whether or not to include items in the consent agenda or whether to separate policies out just so that the board has an opportunity to consider it, maybe discuss it, and vote on it. So I think there's two before you this evening. The first is a new based on, go
General
ahead.
counsel, I think we're even one item prior to this. This is just about the property values. and
Oh,
the
I'm
need to-
sorry, yes.
That's okay.
This is 8.
Sorry.
That's okay. I was trying to roll with you, Dan.
gonna
but
get
I
there
as soon as
Don't
we
know
can.
where you were.
Thank you very much. So tonight, we're submitting for your consideration 21 properties that the district would like to file complaints against the valuation with the Board of Revision. This is based on property sales. There's got to be a materiality element of at least $500,000 plus at least a 10% increase in the sale price compared to the value that those properties are listed on the auditor's site. We'll file those complaints with your permission. There's a new statute that requires the board to pass a resolution for each and every one of those complaints that are filed. So this is something we've done every year, brought to you properties that we're proposing to file new complaints on.
And this is just notice. Do we need to vote or anything on this one?
Those are resolutions. There's a master resolution, so you can vote one time for all the properties listed.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion further? Board Member Matt?
Yes, so General Counsel, Dan, could you please just share briefly about the financial impact of these said properties? And also, is it possible that these said properties or parcels of land could be subjected to tax abatements? Like, would they be able to be approved for tax abatements?
So on the first question, it certainly is related to the property valuation in the city is directly related to the amount of tax revenue that the district receives in local funds. So the district is keeping track of and watching property values. And in these cases, there were sales that significantly exceed what the Board of Revision value is. So that's why we're filing a complaint in order to try to bring the value of those complaints up to the sale price. In terms of abatements, that's a separate process. There is an opportunity for new development to seek abatement. That's through a city process. It would not impact these resolutions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Treasurer Wagner?
I just want to make a comment that on the revenue side, it only impacts our fixed rate levies. Our fixed sum levies don't change no matter what happens to property values. I just didn't want anybody to think we're going to get this big rush of money.
Vice President Bolton?
Good. She took care of it.
Oh, okay. Board Member Lindy?
No, I was jumping to the next one.
Oh, okay.
This one needs to be
Does
voted on.
anybody have anything else about this one? All right, let's go to the next one. Board Member Lindy?
We have to
did you
vote.
need to vote? Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. I thought we were going to do one vote for all of them.
One vote for all.
So, but I thought we were going to put, okay. Let's take a vote.
You're voting for each different resolution, but there's 21 properties in this resolution. You do one vote.
That's right. It's a
Makes sense?
master
Okay.
resolution that gives the board's approval to file complaints on each of those 21 cases. That's right.
Okay. Treasurer Wagner?
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. Now, Board Member Lindy, please update us about the resolution adopting
Sure.
new board policy.
Sure. So this, General Counsel was referencing this a moment ago, and just as a process point, as we're doing more with a consent agenda than we used to. I think there's more, even more that we could do. But one of the things we're trying to do is proactively pull out recommendations from policy that might warrant some discussion or questions, and more routine cleanup items, putting in the consent agenda, at least as a default. For this one, this is a function of a new state law that requires school districts to adopt what we've called here prohibition of affirmations of specific beliefs, which the statute language, which you can see on board docs, basically says the district shall not require any employee to believe certain things. We shall not require any student to believe certain things, parents to believe certain things. It's open-ended. It doesn't define what those specific things are. But we are following the new state law's requirements to ensure that our district doesn't impose belief restrictions on those different stakeholder groups. So if you're interested, the language in the statute parrots exactly what's in the statute.
So thank you. Is there a motion to,
And I move to adopt the resolution.
is there a second?
Second.
Somebody.
Somebody
Okay.
did.
Any further discussion? Vice President Bolton?
It seems somewhat twisted from a standpoint of, I think it makes good sense about preventing anybody from, I guess, some sort of affirmation of particular beliefs at a time when indeed the same organization that is presenting this to us indeed is exercising apparently its plenary rights and ability to tell a lot of people what they're supposed to be or not be and how they're supposed to be treated or not treated. But knowing that this is the law and knowing that this is what is required of us, I just continue to find that not the hypocrisy, but the twisted nature of what is coming to us from Columbus. But certainly we have to have this as our policy.
Board Member Lundy.
I will affirm that it is dark out there. I will just add that the original language on this was titled affirmations of specific beliefs, and we changed it to prohibition on affirmation of specific beliefs. It was a team effort.
You gotta love our policy committee. We are working together. I love it. And you know, it's to your point, it's really, it's good for people to know that there are things we have to do because we have to do them. And it doesn't mean that we like them, but we can manipulate and strategize where we can. So thank you. Any other further discussion? All right, let's take a vote. Treasurer Wagner.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossen?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. Board Member Matt, please update us about the resolution amending Board Policy 3440.
Okay, yes, so this actually came out of the Budget and Finance Committee, but essentially the policy is to switch from complete reimbursement to per diem reimbursement for travel as well as meal expenses. And so my understanding, and Mr. Guston could correct me as well, is to really help us to become more fiscally sound and more just financial stewards of our dollars. And so this has been the recommendation from the Budget and Finance Committee. And these expenses also have to be pre-approved by the treasurer. And I invite anyone from the Budget and Finance Committee to add some additional information if necessary.
So is there a motion that?
So I move to adopt the resolution about job expenses.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Board Member Craig?
I just wanted to add on, part of the discussion around this also comes from the work that the audit team has done in recognizing that having to gather receipts for each of these transactions for meals has become somewhat problematic and overly complicated because, for instance, if you had a flight that got delayed and you decided to buy lunch at the airport, not permitted, but you fly 4 hours and you buy lunch on the plane, potentially, or you land somewhere and you buy lunch, so like things like that were very complicated and did not always make for easy understanding. And so now using the per diem, it will just also make the work more efficient. And also it takes a little bit of the stress off of the one person whose task was to make sure all of those receipts were correct. And so I think that again, shows you how much we're working with so little staff, doing such large amounts of work, and why things like this are a great way to prove that efficiency and manage the workload in a more effective manner. So give a little credit to some recommendations from the audit team. It's been a discussion point that we've made at the audit committee meeting a couple times now.
Any further comments or questions? So Treasurer Wagner, take a vote.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossett?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. We've had one additional topic. Vice President Bolton, would you describe the next topic regarding the Xavier Montessori Lab School?
Yes, I have a possible floor motion for consideration. Some background. Some weeks ago, we heard information from the administration that about the closing of the Xavier University Montessori Lab School, and that closure might provide or present an opportunity for the district, our district, to begin a Montessori Lab School in Cincinnati Public Schools. The administration has asked for direction from the board as to whether or not to move forward. Much work has already been done, but this is a motion to direct the administration to move forward with the proposal to open a Montessori Lab School at Bramble Nature Campus. I so move and hope for a second and discussion and ultimate passage. Thank you for hearing the motion from the floor.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Board Member Craig?
So I think, again, I think this is something we've talked about in the past about the work we're going to be doing with this. I think it would be helpful to reassure both the public and I guess also the board that what we'll do also in approving this is that the expectation is that there would be updates on a regular basis as to the progress and as to potential additional costs associated with the move, so that it is something part of our regular budget discussion, because we recognize that there are additional costs that result in us having to make other decisions. And so as long as, as we think about this, making sure, and then the other part that I want to also kind of make sure we're thinking about as we do this as well is just at some point having the longer term future discussion as to what will this school develop into. I think we're having the short term discussion as to bringing the school in. But I think we also need to have the longer term discussion as to the opportunities for what this school will look like and what the expectations are. And then the third thing I would say is that I think we also want to look into the potentials for, and I think it's something you're already doing, but the potentials for how do we educate our current teachers in our Montessori schools on the Montessori standards using the resources that we would be getting from the bringing in this lab school, because I think that was part of the goal of doing this, was that it would allow us to free up costs that we're spending paying someone else to do this process for our teachers, to be able to do it ourselves and potentially do more teachers each year than we normally would.
Any other discussion? Do you have anything? I'm particularly excited about the ability for us to train our own teachers around the Montessori program and not have it be an additional cost to them. So I really do hope we get that up and running. And that's one big reason why I want to support this, is because it will allow our staff to be trained in something that there's clearly a need for and a desire for, but it has been cost prohibitive. And then also, we can continue to be our trendsetters and train other people around the city and maybe around the region that want to get Montessori trained and can pay us to do that, and then maybe stay. So I would hope that we can also consider some, I don't know what it's called, where exchange for training, like, you do so many years for us and then we train you. Maybe we can be creative with our training so that we could not only generate some revenue, but also increase our staff of trained professionals. So any other discussion? Vice President Bolton.
Yes, I want to second what you said, President, and also what Member Craig mentioned. I think, too, that I'm a very big believer in our heritage as the national leader in Montessori public education. I'm also a big believer that you invest in your assets and you don't always dwell on your deficits. And this is a great opportunity, because one of the things that has held us back on many occasions is the ability for us to get our many, many wonderful Montessori teachers properly licensed, properly recognized with the proper credentials. And now this will allow us to do that in a way that is very exciting. And to your point, President, I think this continues then our leadership nationally, and as we heard in one of the meetings a little while ago, internationally as well, regarding Montessori education. So this is a great opportunity.
Any other discussion? So let's vote on the motion on the floor. Treasurer Wagner?
So I have a question, Mr. Hoying. Do I need a 48-hour waiver because this is, no? Just a motion, thank you. Just double checking. Okay, Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossan?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Abstain.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. Superintendent Murphy, please introduce our next topic.
All right, gladly. Mr. Burkhart is going to join me today. We are very excited to share with you our project management plan and some other details, just to give you update on where we are with the District Performance Redesign Sustainability and Growth Plan Phase 2. And so just a real quick snippet of Mr. Burkhart bringing together members of all of the schools involved and departments that are needed to make this plan work in time for the start of the school year. Mr. Burkhart.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm very excited to give you an update to the Growth Plan Phase 2 implementation. I'm even more excited to let you know that there is only one slide in this slide deck for tonight. Rob, can you click on? So the one slide also shows our work that we are doing in relation to the growth plan. So as we are moving forward, we started these meetings on January 8th, and they happen every 2 weeks. Those meetings happen here at the Ed Center and in room 110, and we consider it the room where it happens, if you know the Hamilton reference, is the room in which we make sure that all phases of the growth plan are being addressed and that we're answering questions. As I move left to right on the spreadsheet that you will see in front of you, the first tab has the overview of what is happening within the district in relation to each school, the current grades as well as the grades for next year, as well as a description of any changes that are happening. If we move over to the right, we have global questions, and those questions come from principals and school leadership teams about the actual process in relation to the growth phase 2. We also color code those, so once they are actually answered, they're either color coded as green, meaning they are done. Yellow is we still have some answers, but we need to finalize it. And if it's color coded red, it means that we need an answer as quick as possible because it's a very important topic. As we moved right across the spreadsheet, we have a pathway matrix, which shows everyone the pathways within each corridor and the grade bands within each one of those corridors as students progress, for example, through the East Corridor, the Central Corridor, or the West Corridor. The next tab has all of our school names along with We have not filled in all the IRNs yet, but if we happen to need a new IRN and/or a new name, this is where we would capture that information on either of those two. As we move to the right, we have projections from 1/31/25, and those are the projections, the updated projections based on our latest, greatest information for each school. And so that any point in time, anyone can go look for the latest, greatest information. We're considering this spreadsheet a one-stop shop for any questions in relation to the growth plan. As we move forward, we are looking at the master move schedule, and this is a work in progress. So as we have dates in relation to moving one school to another, or moving teachers, or moving materials, we are going through each one of those in a systematic method so everyone can look and see what we are moving when, where, and how. Additionally, we have key dates. So those key dates are each one of the growth meetings, as well as each one of the special tasks that are associated within. These are working documents, so right now we have everything updated through March and April, and as those new dates come on, we will make sure that those go on this as well. As we move forward to the right, we have all of our schools listed. Each school has the possibility of asking questions within each corridor, as well as in each functional area. So we have teacher staffing and building staffing, which is answered by the HRT staff, transportation, student dining, purchasing, ITM, phones, communications, facility needs, student needs, new office needs within enrollment, budget, curriculum, master schedule, partners, community and parents, athletics, and other. So in each one of these tabs, each one of those are spelled out. Again, we are also using the green, yellow, and red method to make sure that we are highlighting each of one of those areas as we're moving along. So every school is represented here. We are asking the team, and the team is mighty, to go in every week and provide answers and making sure that their information is updated. We also, within the room, have all of the principals and school leadership teams, as well as all the department directors, that we will go through every school one by one to be able to have some standalone time to be able to make sure every question is answered. So obviously, this is a work in progress. Every other week, we get together, we solve any outstanding issues, and look to the future on how we're going to make sure that all of the phases of the implementation plan are operational by August 1st. That's my one slide.
Thank you for the brevity. Board members, do you have any questions? Board Member Weinberg?
I do apologize. I may have missed this already, but what do the colors mean? The green, the yellow, and the red?
Yeah, so if you look at the global questions or any of the others, if it's
I'm on the
green, it means it's...
overview, if I'm on the overview page.
Oh, on the overview? So the overview, the colors are either merger, reconsolidation, consolidation, or restructure. So we have those, and you can see on the notes on the right-hand side, it says what is actually happening to each one of those sites. That's important because in the CBA language, it talks about what happens to staff in a restructure versus a consolidation. So we wanted to make sure that we called those out. So at each school, we know exactly what's happening to each building so that staff knows what type of CBA language they're governed under as they make transitions from one building to another.
Thank you.
Board Member Craig?
So I'm going to reiterate a thought, and this is more of a rhetorical point that I still continue to raise concerns for, which is I think there are a couple of schools where we are projecting numbers of students who would enroll, and I don't know that that always matches up to what parents' decision-making process will look like. I'll give an example. I think Evanston is projected as based on the pathway matrix, I believe it is, to be filled by certain schools that I just don't historically believe has shown a demonstration that that's the school they would choose for their kids at that age grade. So I still have concerns with whether or not we will, not this year, meet the 7th grade numbers, but future years meet the 7th grade numbers. Especially since Douglas is not a natural progression anymore. And that's, for a lot of students, that's actually their nearby school to Evanston is Douglas for your pre-K through 5. So I think I just think there may need to be some discussion as we go forward. If we're not seeing the numbers in future years, revisiting that potential or even adding that sixth grade in to give at least another option for students there within that community. Again, I know the community is not exactly blossoming with tons and tons of new kids right now because of the lovely housing costs and all the other factors that might be affecting how our neighborhoods are set up that we don't control. But I do think that's something we really do need to be looking at. I understand and I recognize that we have some needs for and some changes that we're doing, but I do think we're projecting what the numbers will look like and what the seats are. We can't project what parents' decision-making will be, and that's just the difficulty of our district. I do have a question in regards to potential transportation differences in schools, right? So we have some schools that are 6, 7, 8, some schools that are 7, 8, some schools that are 5, 6, 7, 8, I think. And just thinking about from a lowering the cost aspect of it, how are we thinking or how are we working through transportation aspects for each of those different types of middle schools and or junior highs? Because I can imagine the 7, 8 might still be on Metro, but a 6, 7, 8 would be weird to put.
Right now, Board Member Craig, our thought is that we would have one system for every school. So for example, if it's a middle school, grades 5, 6, 7, 8, we would have yellow bus service. If it's a junior high, grades 7, 8, we would have Metro service. That's our thought right now.
Okay. And I think, appreciate the thought too. And again, I think that's one of those things as we go through just for us to kind of also explore, because I think one of the reasons we moved 7th and 8th grades back onto the Metro was just in general, the cost was so much cheaper on Metro than it is on Yellow Bus. Now, if that cost can be offset by not having to travel as far, that's another factor involved for me. So, I mean, I think that's something for an updated projection of transportation costs would be a great one, because I do recognize, and we got a little bit of the transportation costs before, that some schools, their transportation numbers are in large part because we're transporting students based on prior magnet status, prior other enrollment reasons. That does not necessarily exist under what we are currently projected to go into. The third kind of thought and question I had is, I know there was some documentation provided on board docs that was centered around the cost per school or cost per pupil of each school. And I wanted to not necessarily ask you all, because I don't think it's a document you all provided, but wanted to kind of get a better understanding of, is the expectation that under these new years, we will be able to kind of see a more accurate or more realistic cost per student or these type of breakdowns? Because I think one of my struggles also, when we talk about price, the cost of a building per student or these type of things, is that those are really the costs that are associated to the school, not necessarily always all the costs that go into the school, right? Like, so there's some things that we just can't ever not, you never not pay for utilities, right? So like in some ways, saying utilities per students is not as accurate a method to think about it as, for instance, resources or staffing and that type of deal. So, I mean, I don't know if that's something we can, in the future, get an update on based on these new numbers, new projections, is what is that dollar per school? And I'm thinking more from staffing and resources as opposed to some of the other fixed cost lens, because I do think that, again, I use the example of the fixed cost, like if you have one building that housed 2,000 students, you have another building that housed 1,000 students, the fixed costs are the fixed cost. And no matter how many more students you add to it, it still stays the same. Whereas the staffing and some of the other resources we put into the school do vary based on that. So I just think that would be helpful to get that number at some point so we can have a little bit more accurate, up-to-date number. Because I have concerns that we are also, again, it's the last one, I have concerns we also are doing some of the projections with Riverview based on them having the same size building as they had before. And I know like when we got the updated capacity for the building, it was based on a larger student capacity than I believe they could have in one floor of the building or in the portion of the building that which they have access to, versus Spencer's having, and there's also like the percentage of the building they actually have versus what is the total size of the building. So if we get little updated numbers with those things as well, be helpful for us to see as we continue going on this path.
Yeah, those numbers for Spencer and Riverview might be a little off because there's a lot of shared use space in that building, so you can't just divide the cafeteria half and divide the gym in half and divide some of those other areas in half. So some of those might be more, in that example, that's a little bit more fluid because we can't split those specific areas in half. Media center, for example.
Thank you. Board Member Weinberg?
Yeah, so I just had a question in regards to busing, and this is talking about yellow buses. Have you all thought of, or have you looked at, for example, the particular schools that will be taking in other students? For example, if we have Ethel Taylor students going to Roe Hill, have we looked at the consideration for the mileage for the school, for the yellow bus, and for any other particular school that might fall into a category, making sure that those particular families do not have to worry about their students walking and will probably fall in the guideline of qualifying, but if they don't qualify, what are the steps that we need to take to ensure that they have a safe way to get to school?
So we have been saying publicly that we'll continue to follow the board policy around providing transportation to students. I will remind some of the communities, the Avondale community, they're having conversations around that very topic just to help to make sure the kids get to and from school safe through the neighborhood. And I suggested the work that they're doing there could be a model for some of the other communities to consider as well.
Are you done?
Yes, thanks.
Board Member Mapp?
So my question is very similar, and it pertains specifically to Woodford, or the schools that have lost their magnet status. But I know that Woodford, while they are no longer being provided with transportation, they also don't have boundary lines. And so as it pertains to our board policy, I believe, or maybe even the state, we're required, I'll say board policy, 1.5 miles. We have decided we will provide transportation for students that live within that 1.5 mile distance. So how are we, I guess, supporting the students and families at Woodford who no longer has transportation?
And no longer have it because they were there under the magnet status?
Correct, but what if they live within that 1.5 mile distance, but because we don't have set boundary lines for Woodford, how do we approach that situation?
I believe the right answer is based on board policy, we have to provide that transportation if they live within that neighborhood, I believe. Now, maybe there's something I'm not understanding about the question. But they no longer have transportation because of the loss of the magnet status.
Correct.
So, and you're right, they don't have a boundary either. So theirs is really, really tricky. I know that they did some work around actually reaching out to their families to see if they would continue with the school, and I believe they got positive feedback and results with that. So I don't think there's an obligation for us to provide transportation, but somebody will definitely correct me, I'm sure.
I think I just have a different approach. So yes, that may be feasible for some families, but I do think it would be incumbent upon us if we have said policy in place that if they live within a certain radius, that we would make sure, because they're in that actual community of the school, they're not traveling from another neighborhood. If I could be wrong, but I would assume that we're expected to provide them with transportation.
So the hard part is, I think what you said before, they don't have a boundary. So Ms. Burkhart and I will talk about this a little bit more and bring something back to the board if that's okay. But just based on, off the top of my head, not having the magnet status, not having boundary, I'm not certain about our requirement around transportation, but I'm certainly open to hearing from the board.
Okay. And then my other question is around just the engagement process. I know that there's the partnership with Cohere. And so I think the partnership with Cohere is supporting the efforts of the engagement process with certain communities, but not all communities, correct?
Yes, ma'am. So
Okay.
they're doing this for us pro bono and asked me for one project. And I did ask them if in that one project, could it include 2 schools? So right now, that's the only thing we're doing with Cohere is the conversation around current families and families that could be going to the school but choose to go other places. We have not been able to expand that work to other neighborhoods.
Okay, because that is what I'm curious about. How do we ensure that collectively as a district, our students, our families, our educators are informed about the upcoming changes and receiving that same type of attention? So I know that Ms. Russo shared kind of that plan, but making sure that it is really being implemented again so that all of our families are receiving that same level of support.
Vice President?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the reference to boundary lines and attendance lines, especially where there may be none. And then also, we heard from folks from kind of one parcel, the LEAP and Roll Hill and Ethel Taylor folks talking in terms, if I recall, just on what end of the street they may live on may prevent them from being able to go to LEAP, let's say. I think it might not be a bad idea to have a little bit of a review, which apparently you are, looking at these attendance boundaries. I had a number of requests from the folks in Mount Washington, where like the resource coordinators there, because that's a clicky school, a Community Learning Center Institute folks, they would love to be able to have a sense of what boundaries that might be, because they have the Mount Washington boundaries, but now do we also have the Riverview boundaries, and do they go all the way up to Mount Adams? Their interest was, we want to recruit. So they wanted to see if those boundary lines or attendance lines. So I think that would be great to, I know all this work that you all are doing. I do think some attendance lines might be of interest without necessarily disrupting anybody.
Yeah.
I hate to, it's sort of a wink and a blink about it, trying to still be true to policy, but also find a way to make this transition work for families. So I'd appreciate that effort. If the administration can look at that and maybe get back to us about it, that'd be great.
We can share and remind of what we currently have, and then we can discuss what we need to consider moving forward.
Thank you. I'm just going to add, I think, just a couple of points. To me, the way that we get through projection of enrollment is engagement. I love the fact that data is being used and we're looking at all the numbers, but there's nothing wrong with asking families how many would come back, how many would like to stay, where would you like to go? And that's something we don't need Cohere for. We need to use our own resources and engage the families that currently exist at these schools and ask them what their plans are so that we know data and we're not just looking at numbers. It kind of pains me that we don't definitively know how many students are going to utilize transportation or be impacted by the transportation removal from Woodford and or Taft Elementary. Like, we should know and ask them, if we do not provide you transportation, are you planning on coming back? That's not a projection. We can find out how many of those students would be impacted. That's engagement, and that's not, I don't hear enough of that. Also, with regard to transportation, I had asked before at the work session, can we look at grandfathering Taft Elementary particularly for their transportation, because they have shared transportation with the charter school that is 100 feet away. So to remove their transportation for that particular school, but we're providing transportation, the same bus is going right there, doesn't seem equitable to me, and I have a problem with that. And we should know how many students are impacted by that number with regard to transportation because we've asked them. We know that, and that's not a projection. That's not saying, hey, this many students, and I understand 60 students can go to Rockdale, but how many students would stay? You find that data by asking and engaging. So that should be done to me. Grandfathering has been done in our district in the past. I'd like to know what the cost of that would be if we did that for Taft Elementary or Woodford. I'm not exactly sure about the Woodford piece because they may have that figured out. But grandfathering has been utilized when we have removed magnet status. And we removed their magnet status years ago, but not the transportation piece. So I would like a cost of that. One thing that still kind of concerns me, because I keep hearing it from the community, is regarding the Evanston Junior High, and that one person told me, and I couldn't refute them because I didn't quite know that South Avondale is in a different corridor than Evanston, and that we're busing kids across the corridor. Well, I thought I definitively defended it, but I need to know if I did or not. And so are we moving students who live right next door, sixth graders, rising sixth graders, they live right next door to Douglas, they can walk to Douglas, but now we're adding a cost by transporting them to South Avondale, which is more than 1.5 miles, so now we have to pay for transportation of them. And my question was, can we just have the Douglas students go through the sixth grade? Like, what does that look like? The rising sixth graders go to Evanston because transportation is an added cost. So again, we find that data out by asking them, how many would stay? How many would go? Do you need transportation? And I do know many families have shared that they're looking at, unfortunately, other options because of that. So we need to do some better marketing of our own middle schools. I think we've got excellent programming, much better than what they're being offered, and they're choosing not our options. So the other thing that I'm kind of curious about is the Riverview piece. We didn't decide as a board around, I don't think we got the cost of those freshmen or sophomores and juniors that wanted to graduate from Riverview. We talked about the current seniors and the juniors, but what is the cost regarding those students that are wanting to finish? We didn't finish that conversation. So I'm interested in what does that look like for the Riverview students where the numbers are significantly low and they wouldn't have a full complement of coursework. What are their options? I'd rather talk about that sooner than later. So grandfathering transportation specifically for Taft and Woodford. Again, projection of enrollment is great. I think that's one data set, but you collect data by asking people, and that can very easily be done through the resource coordinators, sending out a survey, asking families. We need to know definitive data on if they are planning on staying and what their needs are, and I don't think we've done enough of that. I'd also like to know what is the engagement calendar of these schools that are being restructured and having programming changes. We need to definitively engage those families to get them to understand that maybe they don't have to move. Like College Hill, I was at College Hill, and some of those parents were misinformed that they were going to have to choose a school, and they didn't know that they automatically get a middle school option. So again, engagement is just key, and I really would like to see more of that data collected in first person through surveys of the people that are impacted. Thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Craig?
I just wanted to revisit it, maybe a topic for us to talk about or think about as we go forward. And I know it was brought up by Board Member Mapp, raising the Woodford boundary line conversation. I think this may be an opportunity for us to create a boundary line that is somewhat overlapping, Venn diagram-ish. In part because I do know that we did have few folks come in here and say, like, they live in Pleasant Ridge, but they decided to send their kid to Kennedy Heights, or send kids to Woodford because of particular reasons. But also because I know that folks who live right around Woodford actually has their neighborhood school listed as John P. Parker, which would mean we would be busing a kid who lives within walking distance of one school to another school where they do not live within walking distance. And so it's not that we have to move the parent there, but if they have the option of picking, or like you could be within a couple of schools, and that same thought process we had with regards to like how some students would be able to go from Silverton and Pleasant Ridge and somewhat of an overlap, might be a way to also, for us to envision, again, giving options to students. And I was just curious, I know previously President Moffitt had brought up whether or not folks were able to select like Silverton or Pleasant Ridge as options when you were selecting schools. And I just wanted to know if Woodford was another option, was listed in those potential for a parent, because if a parent can't select Woodford, you're not gonna have any people in that same vein. So I think that would be kind of helpful to understand on that lens.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes, what Member Craig brings up, it's interesting. This was talked about 7 years ago. The idea that we had a cluster of schools, that first of all, we had to get rid of the Paideia because that was not attracting anybody. And then also that cluster of schools on the east side, basically, of Silverton, John P. Parker, Woodford, and Pleasant Ridge. We made the determination, absolutely positively, don't change the boundaries of Pleasant Ridge because somehow that's working. And instead we build an addition. And so I do think there's something to be said within a corridor, especially of actually a cluster of schools, if that makes sense. Now, I do recall in an district-wide LSDFC meeting being confronted by some members of one school saying, don't change our boundaries because we don't want you to. So it's kind of dealing very diplomatically and politically. And frankly, the idea that, suspending the bus piece of magnet schools, a number of our schools have lost their bus service, and that's a hard decision. But I will say, too, that for many, many, many years, and I was glad that President Moffitt brought this up at least 3 years ago, for many, many years, the children in Winton Terrace have walked right past their neighborhood school to be bussed up the hill into College Hill. Or the College Hill kids are being bussed over to maybe a handful and over to Mount Airy. So all that kind of social engineering we were all doing, this is long before I was even on the board, that has been disruptive, but it became embedded and institutionalized and perpetuated. So this is a great opportunity to see what we can do to have a little bit of sponginess, if you will, or reconsideration of some of these lines. But I can't think of a better group of folks to worry about that, and better you than necessarily us. But please, do it, the attendance boundary. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's great.
And I just have one more question. Can you confirm that the drop down for PRM or the ask has been for many years, to Board Member Craig's point, has been allow students who live in the Gulf Manor address and that address, who don't want Montessori, they've been forced to go to PRM. And we've been asking, hey, can they choose John P. Parker? Can they choose Woodford? Can they choose Silverton? And I don't know why that has been not done, but has that been done for this year?
They can choose Silverton, they can choose John P. Parker.
Can they choose Woodford?
They cannot, they can. Jeremy and John said they can.
They can choose Woodford. Okay. Have we seen
Back to the bridge.
have we seen an increase in those numbers at all since that drop down has happened? Maybe so. Maybe. I hate to put Jeremy on the spot like this. I'm very curious because it has been a significant number that have requested that. And so I'm wondering, does that matter? Has that mattered?
We haven't. In terms of the monitoring of that, to look and specifically see a student that is picking that option now that it's available as opposed to something else, is not something that we can necessarily distinguish because it's an option that's available for a future state, if that makes sense. So it's not like they can change it in the middle of the year so that we could see they were changing it. So we don't know what they would have picked if it hadn't have been there. So we can't really monitor it on a strictly count basis. On the overall population of what we expect for next year, we're not seeing any impact so far.
Thank you. Any other board member comments? Superintendent Murphy, do you want the last word on that?
Yeah, we look forward to continuing to do the work. I think we are off to an amazing start, and thank you for giving us this assignment.
Absolutely. We are chugging along, board members. We are chugging along. We are cooking with grease, as the old folks say. Superintendent Murphy and Treasurer Wagner, please update us about the budget. Dun, 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 the budget, money.
So good evening. We're hoping to have a robust conversation around the student budget and the progress that we are making, and we need some guidance from the board on some next steps. So if you'll flip to the next slide, please. So I was asked to do, this is what we're going to try to cover tonight. You know, I talk fast, but it depends on how many questions and conversations you have. So I was asked to do a little bit deeper dive into student-based budgeting that wasn't clearly understood. A review of the staffing formulas, and I just recently, like an hour ago, sent them to our CFT president for review for accuracy. But I wanted to go over the survey results. Unfortunately, I only got 3 responses, so we're probably not gonna, we'll have conversations about it because we do need to have decisions based on what are we gonna do with the cash reserve, what are we gonna do about preschool expansion, and then a conversation about the class sizes. But and then we'll go into where we stand today with fiscal year 26 update, a little challenge for fiscal year 25, and then go into the long-range planning, i.e. levy conversations, and what deadlines you're facing on those. So student-based budgeting. I try to boil this down to as simple as possible. We go through a process where we project the number of students, and the revenue, there's a base rate for every student that's in a school. So we'll just make up a Mount Airy, 600 kids. So look at a base rate times their 600 kids. And then some grades get weighted because they're like 3rd grade might be a little bit more costly because you're focusing on reading. 9th grade got an extra weighting because of the transition in the high school. And then we actually added weights based on students with disabilities, and each disability got a different weighting factor, and we use state guidelines for that. Gifted students, English language learners, depending on which category they fell into. So category A, I don't remember all the letters, but category A is if you were English language learner and you were in the district or the state education, public education for 180 days or less. Then the next category was you've been in for more than 180 days, but you're not yet proficient on English. The 3rd category is you're proficient on English, or you've been in for more than 2 years, but you're not quite proficient, I think. And I'll go back through those rules. But anyway, so there's 3 different categories in English language learners. There are 2 different categories on gifted weighting, K-8 and 9-12. And then in career tech, each of the cluster groups have different weightings. And then there's the poverty factor that they actually use in the state funding formula. So all those things get added to the conditions and the size of the building of the students. It generates a big revenue. So the school takes that revenue, we'll just make up a number, $14 million, and they go through the staffing formulas to come up there with their staffing decisions. They're reviewed for compliance. And this is one of the weaknesses in student-based budgeting, is that we had challenges with some of the special needs compliances. But the schools go through, they calculate how many classroom teachers they need based on formulas, the P-Art music, intervention specialists, based on, all this stuff are based on formulas that are dictated either by state, federal, or collective bargaining agreement. So then they come with their staffing budget, and then they add to that a non-personnel expenditure budget to develop their school budget. So I've been playing with some modeling in here, and there's some challenges. The other challenge, so the 2 major challenges of student-based budgeting was student mobility, because you staff at the beginning of the year and students move around. So some schools gain kids all year long, and so the staffing formulas require you to hire more people, but they didn't have necessarily the revenue to cover that. And then schools that lost students throughout the year would have staff, but they would lose revenues throughout the year, and so they ended up in a deficit situation. So if we could figure out the mobility piece, it'd be great. And then, like I said, the compliance, which just needs a little bit more education and monitoring, I think. So Rob, if you'll jump to, if you don't mind, that spreadsheet I just sent you that shows the staffing formulas. I don't have these posted on board docs yet because I forgot earlier today, but I will post it on board docs. It's all the staffing formulas as we know them, and whether they're driven by state, federal law or the collective bargaining agreement. And I'm having extra eyes on it to make sure that we didn't make any mistakes. But you can go through, it goes through all the certificated staff, all the classroom staff, the Montessori programming, because they have different formulas in the collective bargaining agreement, how it calculates your PE art music allocation, and then other certificated staff like counselors and librarians and you're going so fast I can't read it. Yours, that's okay. But anyway, we won't go through all this stuff, but this is how we build the school budgets now. And if we were going to do student-based budgeting, we might consider changing some of them. I don't know. But I was asked to show you how many of them are not just CPS practice, but they're actually dictated by something that would have to be either renegotiated or a law changed. Okay? So if you flip back, please. You're so good at that. Thank you. Okay, so this is a graphic. I'm trying to show how title funds, because the general fund pays for base education, and it's based on our requirements and our needs. Title funds are supposed to supplement on top of what the general fund pays for. So if it's something that's like, we'll use the math curriculum, that what Mike likes to use as an example. If it's used by every third grader across the district, then you can't use title funds because not all schools are title. So what you could do is if the title schools wanted to buy an extra supplemental workbook to work on third grade math, then they could use title funds, but the title non-title schools can't. So it becomes very limiting when you're trying to do things district-wide and standardize services to students. But so these are the major ones. So you have the general fund, and then each title gets layered on based on the purpose of that grant. So Title 1A is to approve basic programs, and it focuses on disadvantaged economic students. And that gets allocated on a per pupil basis to the schools, and the school's leadership team decide how they're going to use those funds. You remember the Title I tree I showed you before. Idea B focuses on students with special needs, and that's usually dictated by the IEP. Title III supports language instruction for English language learners. And Title IV, which used to be drug-free schools, is now called student support and academic enrichment. And so, like I said, there's a bunch of tests you have to follow to make sure that you're not supplanting what the general fund, in other words, replacing what the general fund would do versus what's supplemental to a student. Does that make sense? Okay. Just a reminder, we went through this on last Saturday. I just left it in here as a reminder that we've committed to creating operating budget, general fund operating budget that does not exceed our forecasted revenues. Next slide. So where are we? So if you click on the target link, please. I just updated it a little bit ago because I added the Montessori lab school in. So the forecast is just start off with the, and I know you guys saw this on Saturday, but some data's been updated, and just for the public's understanding, we'll go through it. So the forecast for next year in the general fund right now is $624.7 million, and we'll be doing a new forecast in May based on updated data. We talked to Finance Committee about starting to build up our cash reserves because they're getting concerningly low, and we talked about doing a 5-year phase-in. It's one of the things we need some guidance on tonight, if possible. So if we were going to do a 5-year phase-in, we'd set $12 million of extra cash aside, put it into our savings account, so to speak, and then that only leaves us with $612 million to spend for next year. So off the top are all of our fixed costs, so things we can't cut. You can't cut debt, you can't cut the Fund 34 transfer into the facility master fund. You can't cut your auditor fees or your liability insurance. And by state law, you can't cut the superintendent or the treasurer. So just our salaries alone, not our departments, are in there. So that's total $51 million off the top. And then we have some collective bargaining agreement negotiated costs that include, lead teacher, team leader stipends, terminated benefits, and a bunch of professional development dollars that are allocated to the unions. Early on in the process, we calculated what step increases would cost us for next year up to the general fund, and that includes fringes. We have a crossing guard increase of about $1 million, so I'm trying to keep track of increased expenses over what we're doing now. And then the Suzuki contract, well, we use grant monies this year. We think it was going to come back to the general fund. We might have an alternate funding source for that for one more year, but we don't have any negotiated cost of living increases. That's COLA. Sorry, we speak in acronyms around here. But just in general, a 1% COLA would cost the general fund $4 million. The other funds would have to absorb their portion of it. And because they're limited in size, that means they would probably be able to fund less things if it included staff. The first round of student budgets based on the staffing formulas at the time on January 9th was $397 million. We had not updated the next year's salary. We were waiting for the retirement announcements. We noticed the retirement numbers have gone up because of the STRS 1 year early retirement. So I think we have about 75 teachers that have already announced retirements for next year. And so that'll have an impact on the average salary. So we're recalculating average salary, and we'll update these numbers when we can. But so the base one was $397 million, and then we went through a process where we reduced class sizes. Instead of max amount at the maximum, went down to 20 at K3 and 28 at 4-8. So that cost about $5 million. Then they went through a process of staffing appeals that set 5.7 FTEs were approved for another $600,000. $6.5 million are put in the non-personnel school budget, so they have to go out and allocate those out to the field trips and instructional supplies, textbook, whatever they need in their buildings. Just tonight, I added the Montessori lab school. So right now, we think it's going to be at $1.8 million based on the staffing that was shared with me last week. We do have a meeting next week to go over the details. I don't have any estimates on the Montessori training program, but I do know that we're spending $100,000 a year to train 5 teachers in Montessori. And so we need to work through what this revenue source would look like and what the expenses would look like. So that's just a placeholder. And then the last line there is the board discretionary. So it's the board office budget and the internal auditor's budget. So if you'll scroll up just a little bit, you can see that no, the other way. There you go, right there. So you can see we've committed $484 million to next year's budget out of the 624 or 12, depending what we do with the cash reserve. So we've either spent about 78% of the budget for next year or 79%. So that leaves $128 million if we use the cash reserve set aside, or $140 million without it to do everything in central office. Okay, questions about that? Should I pause? Keep going. Okay, back to the slides. Thank you. Before we go on to this slide, so the fiscal year 25 challenges, and we've had some unintended cost items to the district that was not budgeted, represents about $2.2 million. The crossing guards is one of them. And transportation fine was another one. And then we had some unusual staffing needs out in the schools. So we're going to be going through a process where we're going to be pulling back budgeted money that's this year. It hasn't been allocated or encumbered yet. I mean, it's allocated, but it hasn't been spent or encumbered yet. So we can cover this expense. So we're not chewing into that cash balance any further. Okay. So we shared this, or Superintendent shared this with you last Saturday. I just left them here for your reference. I don't know if you want to talk about them on the spot.
Happy to. All of these fit into the 3 categories we have already discussed: improving our operational efficiencies, increasing student outcomes due to a whole child perspective, and then preparing our young people for beyond the tassel.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. So this was a slide that Board Member Bolton was looking for. I had to go back to the workshop from February 2024. It took me a while to find the slide, but these are things that the board had committed to as initiatives that needed to be funded. So the ad hoc recommendations turned into the growth plan. That was last year's COLA conversation. We were at the time negotiating the preschool promise master agreement. We were going to go into negotiations. We ended up delaying them for a year. Talked about the Public Service Academy, the facility repair plan. We've been talking that for a while. And then career tech expansion and some other new initiatives, but I can't remember what those were from last year. This is the new slide that President Bolton sent me that she shared with you on Saturday. So she asked me to include it for your consideration. Continuing with the growth plan, Department of Student Services restructuring, crossing guards, centralized enrollment. Having a little bit of conversation about re-centralize some of the financial tasks for efficiencies and better service, better compliance. We need to talk about the CPP portion of the $48 million levy that's coming up, and other renewals that are in consideration of other renewals that are coming up, and I have that slinky slide for you. Once again, we're heading into negotiations. We have step increases and benefits to cost out. The facility repair plan that was also on the other slide. The Woodward is the expansion of the career tech programs that are in the growth plan. And so is the Public Service Academies in the growth plan, and so is the RAP and Welcome Center. And you're very intimately familiar with those. So, next slide. I asked this question because as we go through, because you hear me say, we've already allocated 78% of our budget. The money that's left over for central office is a lot smaller than it is today. And so we're gonna have to go through a reduction conversation. So before we start making those conversations and putting things up on the screen, we need to know, like, what's the board not interested in removing and cutting? So that we're not putting up recommendations that you're just gonna vote down because it's what I call a sacred cow. I just like this picture. So we wanna have a conversation about that, and that was part of that survey, was asking some feedback on where those interests lie. You go to the next slide. So for the cash reserve discussion, so we need to know, what is our budget target for real next year? Are we gonna try to start preserving cash set aside or not? So if you go to the next slide, and I'll tell you why it's important. So this is a history of our cash balances in the general fund over the last several years. And you can see that we've strategically invested and our expenses are going up while inflation is going up at a higher rate than our revenues. And so we're having to rely on the cash balances. But you can see it's getting low. And we're projecting this year to end the year with 41.4 million in cash. So why is this important? Because 41 million is a lot of money, but so why is this important to us? So go to the next slide. So if you recall, we get our revenues from the state twice a month. So it comes in very evenly, and for the most part, doesn't fluctuate too much. But our property taxes come in twice a year. Those are the peaks you're seeing. So we get big payments in July, August timeframe, and another in February and March. But look at the valleys. So that's where our cash is, and so we have dry periods where we're not collecting a whole lot in December and in June and July. It's a little bit harsher in December. As you remember, last year, we had to do a tax anticipation note. I just want to make sure that we had enough, but I got caught with too much money in long-term investments, so it was cheaper for me to borrow the money temporarily for 30 days to make sure that we got through our payroll cycle in December than it was to liquidate those long-term investments. And so I took that money, I threw it in a STAR account, earned interest on it, so it was basically a net effect. I think it was like a $50,000 cost. But anyway, so if you start the year with a low balance, December is going to get even harder to deal with. And so what we're trying to do is build up and give ourselves a little bit more cushion so you have a little bit more freedom. We did, next slide, went to and talked to our district friends. Most people are trying to get to a 60-day cash balance. Toledo's trying to get to a 90-day cash balance. So 60 days for us represents about $104 million. So we're not going to go from 44 million and 104 overnight. I mean, that would be devastating to our budget. So what we thought, well, maybe if you phase it in over a period of time, and we just suggested 5 years, if you take the $104 million 60-day cash, subtract out what we already have, 41 million, that means we need to capture 63 million almost over a 5-year period. So it's about 12.5 million a year. And so we just need some feedback as if that's a direction that we want to go in. Do we want to make it longer so it's a smaller value or not, or put it in a levy and hope that that passes but we're getting dangerously low on our cash reserves. So I would pause there for some feedback, please.
Okay. I'm going to go to Board Member Craig first, and then
I just wanted to reiterate, and we've had this discussion in Budget and Finance for, I think, the actually last 2 Budget and Finance Committee meetings. I think the reality is that the reason why this is really important is because our cash on hand is ideally because we are able to sustain while we do not have new revenue coming in at that very second, right? So like if you get to a point where you only have I think we talked about like 30 million was like, or whatever, where we were last time was like 40 or 35 days or something like that we had cash on hand at the start of the year. And so something majorly gets delayed, something doesn't come through, I don't know, President says federal funds will be frozen. Stuff like that, we would be in a hard place if we only had 21 million or lower, these lower amounts. And it puts us in a position where we're having to do these tax anticipatory notes. So I think that's part of the reason we had that discussion, recognizing that by doing it, though, you are having to make a decision not to spend that funds this year and the next 5 years as we go forward.
Board Member Lindy.
Thank you. I was able to see this, or parts of the presentation on the reserve at the last Finance Committee of last calendar year. And I just wanted to say here, some of what I was sharing there, I think this is a really good, important, and healthy thing for us to do. I was surprised only in that 60 days feels kind of short relative to other contexts where I've worked. But I also think in some ways, like our revenues are a little bit, I don't want to say this and jinx anything, but they're reliable in a way that in other contexts, they might be less reliable. Anyway, so I'm just saying 60 days is good. I think we should do this.
Thank you. So the other thing to consider, I'm sorry, I meant to say this earlier, is that because our state and federal grants are reimbursements, last year we were waiting on $40 million of reimbursement on ESSER. I mean, we don't have ESSER anymore, so we're not laying out those big dollars, but that has an impact on cash flow as well. So if they get behind on their payments, and also last year, the county auditor wouldn't commit to us when they were going to issue tax bills, because remember, they were going through those revisions. And so we were afraid if they delayed, then we'd be in serious trouble. So, thank you.
Vice
Yeah.
President, Board.
At least it's not Melanie Bates. I mean, that's, I think we do have to do this. I think that 12 million in one budget year that's already a stretch is too much to ask of everyone. So I can see over a 2-year or 3-year process. If the 12 million and make that be what it is each of those years after we achieve the 12 million. The 12 million is chosen because it represents what?
It's when we need 63 million more.
Right.
So I divided it into 5 years to get
Okay.
12 million a year for 5 years.
Okay, so the 12 million for 5 years would get us to the 60 million. And
That-
once, is that correct?
That would get us to 104 million because we're projecting to already have 41
We've got
million.
one.
Yes.
Well, that's what I need to know, because when you start talking about those sorts of dollars, rather than just thinking in terms of 12, the reality is that has to then be part of whatever the tax request is, too. I don't know that we could budget those many millions conscientiously for that many years, but I think building it into what one of the many asks of the public it's going to be, I think is also a way to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Board Member Matt.
Yes, thank you. Just a thought. One, I do think that this is definitely something that's necessary to do, making sure that we have the cash reserves available. So really trying to allocate monies to have set aside, I think is important. The other thing that I think is important, as you definitively stated that you are not going into our cash reserve, I think it is incumbent upon us to be intentional about how we are spending our dollars. And so what I would like to see is making sure that we are aligning our priorities to the goals that we have established. I don't necessarily see that. Well, I won't say necessarily, I don't see it. I see that we see great ideas and we say, let's do that, versus connecting it to the actual goals that we've committed to. So that would be something that I would like to see.
Board Member Lundy?
I wanted to just clarify that what's helpful here is any comments on any part of the presentation are just limited to the cash reserves.
Right now, just cash reserves. I'm just trying to take notes.
And I'm going to remind the board members to fill out the survey that I know there was some access issues, but I think that's been fixed now. So that will help Treasurer Wagner and her team with the priorities for the board members too. So fill that out. Mr. Crossett?
Yes, I support putting the 12 million into the reserve. I think it's fiscally responsible for us to have a 60-day reserve, and obviously we didn't get to this point in 1 year, and it's going to take us a few years to get out of this, but I support doing it and getting to the point where we have a 60-day reserve. I think it's important to protect the district with that.
So I support us doing it. I just don't want us to stifle our growth in order to get there. So I'm happy to support saving. I just do want us to consider other options. And I don't know if over 5 years is it, but I don't think that we need to stifle growth. I think we can do two things at one time: save and grow and be fiscally responsible. But I would love to explore other options too, because $12 million seems like a small number when you're looking at 640, but it's a reduction of something. So I'd like to see us be a little bit more creative if we can, if that's possible. But I do recognize that we need to save and be fiscally responsible with our money. Anybody else? Board Member Craig?
I just wanted to reiterate, I think there is support for one that Vice President Bolden talked about with us, considering it as part of our determining what the levy should look like, and recognizing that we have, again, the revenue doesn't seem to be increasing from the state, and recognizing that the state expects us to be able to generate our own revenue from stone, I guess, or from trees or something. I'm not really sure where they think these things are going to come from, but I do think if we're doing that and we're thinking about that as part of what we're planning, that makes sense. As we talk about now, maybe not the entirety of the full 12 million as being part of what we would solely do for that purpose, but recognizing that our budgetary needs might say this is something we have to be asking and planning for. And then I want to also reiterate, like, part of the reason we're doing this is because while we get revenue in the, I think forgetting the 2 months there, in June and July, and then we get revenue again in February, we don't have this whole bucket of money just sitting around all year round. Like, it gets spent down. And I think that's the other thing that we have to be recognizing and appreciating about why this cash on hand, this cash balance is important, or cash reserve is important, because again, like you mentioned, the $40 million that we were waiting on ESSER refunds for, the projects that we're doing left and right throughout the district that need funds today, that will get refunded some year, someday, sometime later in the future, that if we can't do. And other districts fell through this problem where they had spent too much on things that weren't absolutely necessary and just didn't have the cash on hand when a federal payment didn't come through right away. Or we saw this a lot, especially with ESSER, where districts ran themselves into the hole because they could not afford the work they were getting refunded back from ESSER for.
So put this in perspective, that each payroll, we're paying out for about $14 million, and that's in net pay and the related withholdings and taxes that we have to pay out. So just to give you a little bit of size for each payroll.
I have a question, Jen.
Yes.
Have we been in this or similar situation historically before?
I don't know. Not in the last 10 years.
I'm kind of wondering, like, how did we get out of it before? What were some of the options that even, I hate to always compare us to other districts in Ohio because that's not fair, but what have we done when we've gotten low before? Not necessarily ESSER, but how do we I'm looking to wisdom
So it's hard to
here.
answer that question because the state funding has changed so dramatically over my tenure and even before that, when we used to be on the guarantee. So our revenues, state revenues stayed pretty consistent. Well, now they're not. So if our enrollment drops, then our revenues drop immediately that year.
Gotcha.
And so also, the first round of the governor's budget that came out for the next biennium budget, he's recommending to fully phase in the state funding formula, but only at 22 costs, fiscal year 22 costs. So if our costs go up with a COLA or something, then we're losing that much more money to support what we need. And so on Thursday, Mike and I are driving up to Columbus to meet with the other urban treasurers to strategize how we're going to have a loud, strong voice of supporting urban education financially.
Gotcha.
So I'll keep you updated on that.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
I think and I think we've mentioned this before, I think it's remarkable that we wait at least 8 years.
Thank you. I was going to say that earlier and I didn't want to interrupt. I forgot.
That the 8 years between major levy requests is simply unheard of under these circumstances. So we do stretch this to the end, and we're in that cycle. We've been here before, but the other piece is that when I first got on the board, President Obama had just been elected, and there was a tremendous influx, millions of dollars, into urban schools. And then ESSER comes along, some 15.
The student wellness came along. We got 12 million of that.
You have this influx of dollars that I think covers how desperate we actually are. So I think those two things, because I have been here where a superintendent will say, I have no idea how much money we really have. That's the very beginning of this is my 17th, 18th year, whatever it is, somebody actually saying that, but then there's that influx. And now we're just faced with the opposite, which is maybe there's going to be a withdrawal of money, especially, or we have the state government also spending out of our line item monies for universal vouchers. So we're in just a tremendously difficult place right now. And I think this presentation, frankly, this whole topic probably should be about 6 hours. But that's what it's going to take and the kinds of decisions. But we've been here before, but I don't know that we've been this, quite this lean.
If memory serves me, when I first came to the district 30-some years ago, we may have been in the state loan fund. And as I'm thinking back, but, and I imagine at the end of each of those levy cycles, our cash got pretty small. And so I think that's, it's just inflation has just grown so much faster than we expected.
Plus the levies years ago were failing.
Right.
Consistently failing. So we at least have, we've had the 20 years of consistent passage for all intents and purposes. That's remarkable too.
Well, and as the city has gotten wealthier, according to the wealth index in the state funding formula, our state share has dropped dramatically. So when I took over as a treasurer, it was almost 50%, and now we're down to 36%.
We can't get a break.
So for every dollar our child creates in the formula, we get 36 cents on the dollar to fund our kids. And property taxes don't grow with enrollment, so those dollars just get spread thinner and thinner and thinner.
I would just add to what Member Mapp said about focusing on what it is that we should be doing, and rather than add and add. That's probably true. That the slide with the boxes, it's actually, I think the first one may even go back to October of '23, but those are initiatives that the board has, and the administration has come up with. And that's part of the attraction of them. And you can see that we've added to them and of what we want to be spending money on, for good reason. But again, these are initiatives. This isn't even necessarily just looking at the goals and guardrails that you're mentioning, or those kind of limiting ourselves. So it's balancing all this that we keep trying to do, more than we probably are able to do.
Okay, ready for the next topic?
Yes. I heard B people say we need 6 hours, but we don't have 6 hours, so.
Right.
Well, we already just did it.
So what I received your feedback, thank you very much. We'll come back to you with some alternatives to consider.
Great.
Okay.
Before we,
Sorry.
before we go on to the next section of the presentation, I did have some feedback on the first part that wasn't about cash reserves. Is now, and it won't be 6 hours, but it's now an appropriate time to do that?
Sure.
That's great. I wanted to make the case for focus. And I think the more things we try to do, the less we will do any of them well. I wanted to just echo what my colleague Kendra was saying about focusing on the goals that we have set. And I think particularly if we're in a shortfall situation, there needs to be a really strong argument that every investment is critical to advancing those goals that we've set as a district. And everything else, I think, falls in the second category. Otherwise, we need to vote to change the goals or something. But I think we owe it to the district to provide some strategic clarity and some consistency. I think second, as we're thinking through your what's sacred and what isn't sacred question, my strong preference would be to receive a proposal from the administration for what they think is going to best advance the goals that we've set as a district and why, and then work from there, rather than trying to work backwards from 7 different preferences from the group of us. That was as fast as I could say that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I do think I agree with you on some things, but the intention around the survey that Jen and her team created was to shorten the time that we discussed priorities, and they gathered some information. So it's not just about priorities on that survey, but I do encourage everyone to fill that out, because that helps to shorten the time period around the discussion, and it helps them, in addition to the administration, figure out alignment of the administration's priorities, budget priorities, and board priorities. So please fill that out. And I do think that there is alignment with the initiatives and our goals and guardrails. So they're not separate at all. We're going to increase scores if we do some of these things on here too. So keep going, Jen.
Okay, so preschool expansion. A couple slides for context. So we first passed this levy as a new money levy, $48 million in 2016 with immediate collection, with a $15 million set aside for the expansion of preschool. That $15 million was to be shared by Cincinnati Preschool Promise and CPS. And we have now outgrown that budget. So this year's combined budget was about $20 million. We were using prior year's unspent cash, because during the first year or two, they were ramping up. There was a lot of unspent funds. But that money's going to run out in '26. So this is part of the levy that's coming up in November of '25. And so we have a decision to make about what to do about that $15 million. Do we leave it at $15 million and scale back our efforts? Do we grow it? And if so, by how much? And then that will dictate what levy you're going to go put on the ballot.
Discussion? Board Member Crossett.
Yeah, I think you probably have presented it, but maybe I could use a refresher. It would be interesting to know the impact of the difference between $15 and $20 million and the whole impact of the whole program in terms of what value it's creating in the education process for future years. I think if we're going to go to the public to ask for $5 more million and not scale it back, we have to have a pretty good argument for why it's worth it. That would be my view.
Thank you. Board Member Craig?
So I was going to say, we'll do it as an assignment at the end too, but I just think we have to get on the ball of the conversation that we committed to doing as part of the master agreement with CPP to both talk about results, but then I think that also is part of the conversation we would have about a campaign around specifically how much benefit that's been gained in the communities. And largely because, as I kept saying during our conversations we were having with them, I think the idea of expansion is not the necessary direction we should be going in the conversation. I think we should focus more on the quality part as opposed to the expansion part, because I think we have expanded probably beyond our means anyway, but we've expanded tremendously beyond what we expected to be able to do. And now we are talking about how we control the quality that's provided for those students to be able to come and go to become kindergarten ready and then be ahead of the game as they go through. So I think there's a great story to be had there, to Board Member Crossan's point, but I will offer that as an assignment at the end of our meeting today.
Thank you. Vice President Bolton?
Yes, I would agree with what my colleagues to the left have said. I honestly believe we've reached the saturation point regarding preschool in this relatively conservative community, district-wide. I think we should focus on the quality piece. I also don't think we should be necessarily thinking in terms of expansion, because I think we've reached it. Looking at the numbers even out of Denver from where this came, this has really been a remarkable achievement to have the kids that we have. And I think it's not that we need more numbers, but the quality piece, as well as being able to focus most particularly on the children that need it the most. It continues to be my concern. So that's sort of where we are. That's where I am right now about the preschool. I do think the levy should be a 10-year levy. The length of it should be longer, but it is, I'm concerned about asking for very much more money for expansion.
Thank you.
Any other comments, board members? I will just share my thoughts. I put on my survey that I felt like preschool was an area that I wanted to support more. And I do think we should invest dollars there. I was for expansion. But I do hear the argument around quality versus quantity. I just question, I'd like to hear from Cincinnati Preschool Promise, CPP, on their thoughts as well around what they're seeing from their side, because we're seeing it from our side, but I also would like to see, I think there's value in their voice around it too, and what they're seeing from their vantage point. And I also think that, is it about time, I'm looking to my colleagues, is it about time for us to have another joint meeting where we would, I know I am meeting with, this week with their board president, but I do think there's value in getting us all together to talk about what they're seeing, what we're seeing, what their desires are, what our desires are. I know that they're using the reserves, but they also have an opinion around what their projections are too. And I think that they had some data when they came to Just Ask Jen a few months ago. They had some projected data too. So I think before we make a big decision, expansion, quality, we need to kind of have a joint meeting. That would be my preference. Board Member Lindy?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Was there an effort to consult with them before this?
I think this was just the board. This was just our side.
Well, they were at Finance Committee
Couple times.
in November, yeah.
Yeah.
Most recently, and so we haven't had a formal conversation about the levy with them, no.
Yeah, I just would just co-sign the joint decision-making process on this.
Yes, I just shared the same sentiment. I think having everyone collectively at the table to identify what those needs are would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, just a couple more slides left. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to talk levy. So next slide. So these are deadlines that you're working up against. You need 2 board resolutions passed. The first one being the stating the need for the levy. Has to be at least 100 days before the election. So your deadline is the board meeting on July 14th or before. We typically do that in the March-April timeframe. The Hamilton County Auditor has 10 days to turn around millage calculation and ballot language. And then you have to approve your second resolution with your intent to proceed to the levy, to put a levy on the ballot. And that's due to the Hamilton County Board of Election no later than 4 p.m., 90 days prior to the election. Dan and I usually take a trip and deliver it ourselves. So the board meeting that would meet that window is August 4th. So now you got to decide what to do. Next slide. So you remember seeing this, we have shared with you before, continue to update it with information as it's known, but here we assumed the cash reserve, so we'll change that depending on feedback. And then with the growth plan moving forward, and those are simply the CPP personnel that are added to the new programs, not CPP, CTE, sorry, the crew tech. The crossing guards, preschool expansion, I just put in an estimate to see what it would look like if you wanted to move forward with increasing it by 5 million. At some point, somebody started talking about expanding the custodial formula, and I didn't know if that got dropped, so I just left it there with a question mark. We have some technology incremental lease increases as things are refreshed. And then with the first one, the $6.5 million is what's coming back from the ESSER. And then in 27, we'll have all that and another 4.3 million. So I'm just showing you new money. And then in meeting with curriculum department, they have some adoptions that are coming up. So this is incremental money as well. So you can see kind of what your new future needs are. This, once again, does not include any negotiated items, right? So already we're looking at 3 mills. Okay, and so 3 mills would represent about 20, well, 1 mill right now is about $8.8 million. Excuse me. Okay, next slide. So then the second part of the need is the facility repair plan that was estimated to be about 170 million. So we just, Chris gave me the schedule and I just keep bumping it backward a year. So that'll be another 4 mills. And so combined, you're looking at an 8 mill levy for new needs. And that, once again, does not include any COLAs. The third long-term need is the 7 construction projects that cost approximately $200 million. And so if you do a bond levy, then you're not financing, you're financing $200 million. So the revenue that you bring in on an annual basis only has to make principal and interest payments. So it's, we calculate it to be about a 2 mil levy, bond levy. The bond levy that we have now that funded the master plan was 4.8, I believe, when we first issued it. And now it's, so it would be about half of what you did before. So that bond, the old bond levy expires December 1st of 31. So you could go onto the ballot on 30 and explain to the taxpayers that you're kind of, it's not a renewal, you can't renew bond levies, but it would be like a replacement at a smaller rate, so their tax rates would go down. And you can do the life of a project or 27 or 30 years, I think, or 35 years with a bond levy, because those assets are much longer. They have to be related to buildings. A permanent improvement levy you could use to fund your facility repair plan for anything that has an asset life of over 5 years. And you can make that a fixed sum levy. You could do 5, 10, or continuing. Or you could do the permanent improvement levy for a specific project and say, well, when that project's done, the levy goes away. So you have options. Next slide. You just kind of have to figure out agree to what our future the real financial needs are, so you can figure out how to size a levy that you need. And then when do you do it? In November 25 is the $48 million levy. You can renew it as is. You can renew it with an increase, switch it to a 10-year. You can only go to 10 years on a fixed sum levy. Or you can let it expire and replace it with something new and bigger. In 26, there's nothing on the ballot yet or on the schedule yet. So you have 26 and 27. In 28, you have another levy, that renewal will come up. So this is just a different way of showing your different options on the current renewal levy, what your new needs are, what your facility repair needs are, and that's probably going to continue to grow bigger because construction costs aren't going down. And then the long-term need. So the next slide, I think, is the slinky slide. There you go. So the one that's coming up in 25, the blue line, is the $48 million levy. So if you go to 10-year, it would renew in 35. The $65 million fixed sum levy comes up in 28. So you have 26 and 27 you can play with, because I highly recommend against putting two issues on the same ballot, because one of them always fails. And then the red line is the $52 million levy that you went 10 years, so that'll come up in 32. So you have 30 and another window of time to do a bond levy. Next slide. Just different timeline. Actually, I put on this one, like which board members are up for election and which year, and when city council's up, because that might factor into how many people you're going to draw to the ballot, to the election on election day for votes. Next slide. This is just you've seen this before. This is the schedule of our debt. Some board member asked me to share that last Saturday, so I just left it up there. We will actually pay off two debt issuances. We did one December 1st of 2024. We made our last payment on one of the city-county stadium cops. And then in June, we'll be paying off the Q-Scooby 2010 Q-Scoobies. So we're paying down our debt. Good news. I'm tired. Okay, so I don't know. I heard questions earlier about whether they wanted to have like a levy subcommittee to talk about next steps and details, or did you want to have the conversation now, or how would the board like to proceed?
Board members, wake up and share your thoughts. Board Member Craig.
So we've talked about the levies for last several, like 5-6 months, actually, in budget and finance, and we'll continue to keep talking about it in budget and finance. So I think there's an aspect of those discussions that we have. I think there is a need to have at least a conversation with our folks that are outside of the district who are assisting us levy. But I do think it's crucial that we have the conversation with CPP first for this current levy, so that we can better also prepare each other for life post whatever you're currently doing. Because right now what we're doing is using unspent funds from previous years to cover the additional costs. And I know the framing that we did with them is recognizing that that's not something that's long-term sustainable. So I do think the conversation with them is helpful to then build a conversation for the larger levy conversation. Also recognizing we should do that in accordance with budget plans. So for recognizing the need to address our future budget cost needs for the 27 school year, which I think would be when we would see the renewal funds hit, that we have to be prepared to start incorporating that into the levy talks. Because if we do a levy based on what our budget looks like this year, in theory, future years may look a lot different, and in some ways a lot worse. So I think it is a good idea to have some discussion going. I just think we need some steps first before we start that kind of separate conversation with our outside folks who are there to assist in that process. The second thing, and I do think this is maybe the crucial part, I do think we need to really have the conversation, if not in this budget discussion, right after this budget discussion, around a levy for next year or 27. Again, because I see a potential disaster situation where we would have a school building where something would fall apart, break, whatever, and we would not have the ability or the funds to do that without giving up something really big to do it. And it's because we've been talking about facilities needs for several years now, and it just, reality is we have to at some point make that commitment to do it. And so I think that if we're not having that discussion right now in this budget cycle, we should at least, as soon as we finish the budget cycle, start the conversation to plan ahead. I think 26 is a great year because, again, we have a lot of folks who are fairly important in DC who will need some support as they go through, and potentially some races that might influence folks to come out and vote. And that would maybe, again, an opportunity for us to utilize some of those resources as well to send a message. But I do think for the opportunities for us to do it, I do think it's just, we need to take some first steps for the renewal of the levy, just so that we're all on one accord. And again, if you did not get a chance to see the video that Preschool Promise produced, it is a tremendous video about the great work that's happening. And I think we have some of the same stories in our schools. And when I go out, people don't ask us, are the kids getting a benefit from those Preschool Promise dollars? They don't understand the difference. Like, everybody recognizes kids are learning and they're doing better. They just don't understand how those funds are used, and the fact that those are the last in funds, or last out funds. And so, like, having that conversation about how much we're working, how much we are doing with state funds, with other resources as well, to ensure that the dollars that are being spent by our district under this levy for preschool, for quality at preschool, that we're tapping out a bunch of our other resources first. And it's a great message to say that we're being really, really efficient and thrift thinking about how those funds get used. And so I think that's a great point that we can use with Preschool Promise, because there's a good story that they have as well with where those resources are going. But I think to your point, maybe let's have and again, just one thought on this is that maybe we have the conversation with Preschool Promise first, then from that, build our conversation up so that we get it done before June.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes, real quick, when is the big FMP off the books?
December 1st of 2031.
So I'm going to put that right there and remember that, because that's a tremendous thing to celebrate. And indeed is more a bookend to, like, this year, is how do we get to that, how do we get to 31? Where we have, a renewal in, I guess, 32, but also there's 25 and 28. I would be very supportive of recognition that we have to have new money. And I think what has been said to me is that the 26 is the better time, because I don't know if it's true, property valuations are occurring in 27.
Right, January 27 will be the next triennial update, so you probably don't want to have a levy right after that.
Yeah. And so I think whatever we're going to decide about preschool, Jen gets mad when I call it that, the $48 million renewal.
Thank you.
Whatever we decide there is going to impact what we're going to be doing in 26. Because you have to be really careful back to back, two years. So I'm very, very supportive of a major effort, both in facilities and also operations, maybe building in that cash reserve, but a big ask in 26. We will have gone through much of the growth piece and gone through a number of our other changes. So I think 26 influences how I feel about 25. And I do think that the big issue is the story of the big FMP coming off in 31. And we have to figure out a financial way to get there, because that's hundreds of millions, more than we would perhaps even ask.
Correct.
And we do have a need for some of these additions, if we're serious about the growth piece, having these additions early in the ask, as well as the actual maintenance of one of our great assets, which is our facilities. They're our biggest billboards.
Any other board member questions, comments?
So I may have misunderstood you, so correct me if I'm wrong. I want to make sure I didn't leave the wrong impression. You can't combine the cash reserve with the PI levy.
Right.
Okay, just so you know.
Understand.
Okay.
And we don't want two levies or two whatever.
You
things
could
on
do a
the ballot.
combination levy.
mhm.
No.
Board Member Lindy.
Thank you. I will not spend long on this. I just wanted to say two things. One is I really appreciate Treasurer Wagner and the presentation. It was very helpful. It was very clear. Second is I don't feel ready tonight to share necessarily where I am on any of these questions. And so that's not a comment on the presentation. I think it was a great presentation. I just wanted to register I'm not endorsing or saying I agree with any idea that's come out yet. I'm saying that I'm still thinking about this, and I'm grateful for the chance to do so. Thanks.
That's fair. Thank you.
Any other board member thoughts, comments? Board Member Crossett.
I agree with Board Member Lindy. I'm just not ready to make a recommendation or have a strong opinion about much of this. I need more time to process it and think about it. But I do appreciate Jen Wagner. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your attention on this late evening.
Well, we are going to spend some time talking about the budget, so you'll hear this again, maybe not as lengthy, but we will spend some more time talking about this in the next few months. To Board Member Craig's point, we need to be talking about the budget early. To Vice President Bolton's point, we need to be talking about the budget often. We're going to do those things. Moving on. Vice President Bolton, update us about the 110-day action plan that we started in our work session. And I think the ask was for you to give us a plan of action. So
Yes, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll direct people to look at the material that is posted. One of which is the necessary tasks that are bar charted by calendar month and year, and the things that have to get done. Those are on board docs, that chart is. And then also, the other thing that I might direct your attention to is the fact that we have basically made about 100 commitments over the last couple of years of topics and issues and initiatives and votes. And so as we try to prioritize, what we are looking at is that in the next 100 or so days, we have huge decisions to make. We have to vote. We're not going to be late on the budget this year. We're going to be able to get through and be ready to vote that in June when we're supposed to. We have a treasurer hiring that has to be there. We have at least 6 or so collective bargaining agreements that need to be hopefully done before the end of the year so that people are able to ratify if it's a successful negotiation sessions. And so what I did is just look at the calendar, and I was thankful that the President Moffett looked and said, see what you can do. But before you at your seat, we have in that 100 and some days, we have 10 business meetings, we have 10 executive sessions, we have 5 finance committee meetings and 4 policy meetings. In all of that, we have to be able to get all of these things done. And whether it's the treasurer search, round of interviews, a number of budget community engagement meetings that have to take place, meetings to finalize the development of the new foundation for CPS. We have another fact-finding suggested for SCPA or even about the foundation. Possibly a special board committee able to convene regarding negotiations, not to participate, but to be at the ready for any kind of guidance. Possibly a special combined committee for levy renewal and planning, which is a normal thing that we do in levy times, meet with those, as was mentioned, our outside folks that help guide us. If we look at this, we really need to think in terms of maybe much of the finance committee meetings could be spent on budget to give us that time rather than necessarily the rudimentary and routine things that we would do in budget committee. All the executive sessions are going to have at least some portion about negotiations, because that's where we can discuss negotiations, not out in the public as such. We also have to kind of remember that the using inquiries, updates, and board matters probably need to be focused in the next 100 days on things that pertain to getting the job done, rather than some of the kind of one-out, one-off kind of things that come to us because people might be particularly interested. And we can't limit the hearing of the public, although tonight was great. We somehow limited that, but probably we can use some of that time focused around the budget. So I think what we want to be looking at is, as the president does the agenda, and as the chairs of the committees and those people that want to spend more time on some of this or have more time, everybody on this board has a tight schedule. And scheduling anything beyond what is already scheduled is also a difficulty for the administration as well as the members on the board. So what we've got to use is the time that we already have scheduled in a way that is the most effective. Plus, we have to, and maybe I can skip to the second part of this to get us through this, we have to develop an engagement plan. And I'm suggesting that the engagement plan that was used year before last, where administration spent a significant amount of time in small group, I don't know that they have the time to do that at this point in time, or if those multiple small groups was necessarily where we want to be. I think what we might want to be looking at and see if people on the board are willing to spend a little time talking in terms of what does the budget engagement look like. Trying to get schools or particularly community members somehow participating. We've done big ones before. We've done surveys before, but I think the smaller group ones were incredibly time consuming for administration that has this tremendous list of work to do. So my issue is using our business meetings, using our exec, using our finance meetings policy if need be, and then also some extra sorts of things that we might do to get us through negotiations being done in early May at the latest, budget being able to be voted on at the end of June, treasurer search, and all this work that the administration's doing regarding the growth phases. So this is what's ahead of us. And it's, I think, visually on that chart, as well as listed out as to what we might do. And I think I'm open for any suggestions or questions that might quickly take care of those two items.
I apologize for being slightly distracted. Board members, it's under a growth plan. I just emailed it to you and to the public too. We were trying to find your files. So
Okay, cool.
that is where they are on board docs, and they are under the growth plan. So all of these are listed that Board Member Vice President Bolton was talking about. Any thoughts around?
Yeah, I would say in that file, you'll see, like what we saw earlier from the treasurer regarding the initiatives over the last few years. You'll see everything that we voted on for phase 2, which we've made some commitments to spend money there or do something there. You'll also see a number of other items that might be of interest to you, but I think this is the one that shows you the density, if you will, of just a couple of months when all this has to be. And it can't be just us talking about it. We have to actually decide things. That's that hard part.
So I will say that I am a visual learner. I like to see it this way. So the visual is good for me. I also offered, in expressing my engagement ideas to the superintendent, that while she is engaging the communities that are impacted with regard to the corridors and the schools, that she also add information about the budget, not necessarily to have an additional time scheduled, but to add budget conversations to the engagement that should already be planned for the communities. I think that is our responsibility to educate around the budget. So it doesn't have to be an additional date, but it can definitely be an add-on to this. And I do think we are going to make some time for for board members to get conversations around the budget and questions answered as well. Does anyone have any other questions? Thank you for putting this together. I know it's late. So we're going to have Vice President Bolton give us a little update on, not now, but for the next meetings and so, and then have Jen give us some additional information and context. Again, send your questions early so that we can get them answered and speed this process up and fill out the survey. Anything else?
I'm good.
And the documents are on board docs under growth plan. They were all there. So just, we did confirm that, but, all right.
And I thank board staff for putting them up there and helping to produce them as well.
We are cooking with grease. All right. A proposed consent agenda has been distributed. Treasurer Wagner, please maintain the list of any exceptions and the exception makers. Do board members, the superintendent, or the treasurer have any exception items to the consent agenda? Board Member Mapp.
Yes, I would like to abstain from the Treasurer's Report, page 7, line item 1. So yes for the Treasurer's Report with that exception.
Also, please note that the treasurer's report was revised, so there's a revised page in the back to show you all the revisions.
Board Member Weinberg.
I'm going to give first from the super, then I'll go to the treasurers. For the super, page 19, section C, athletic and co-curricular activities, line 1 and 2. Then for the treasurers, page 8, line 1, page 12, amendments, line 2.
Page 8, line 1, page 12, line 2.
Amendments, line 2.
Amendments, thank you.
Is that all? Okay. I need a motion and a second to approve the items of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Treasurer Wagner, call the vote.
Thank you.
Call the voting roll for the passage of the consent agenda and revisions.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Mr. Crossan?
Yes.
Mr. Lindy?
Yes.
Ms. Mapp?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
Vice President Bolton?
Yes.
President Moffett?
Yes. Administration and board members, are there any inquiries and updates?
That's why we save it for the end. Everybody's too tired.
We're all too tired. Are there any assignments? I know I heard a couple on the floor. Board Member Craig.
So one assignment relating back to preschool promise is just putting together a coalition with regards to, for the superintendent and her team, to work with the director of CPP to put together materials and information with regards to the positive things that are going on in CPP, the gains, educational gains. Additionally, not for today or not for tomorrow, but like putting together a conversation or a coalition of folks to have the conversation around our potential levy discussions with our outside partners. And so whatever group that is that would be assigned to that, identifying it, I think I would put that to our lovely board president to work with the superintendent and the treasurer to identify folks to have the conversation around our levy once we've established plan of action, I think that is, and then just, again, assignment to the superintendent and her team to bring back information on an updated classroom or updated capacity. I think we had some of that information, but just making sure we have that. But then also maybe to the treasurer and superintendent together, an updated cost per student breakdown of our schools. Since I don't think we've had one since we've just made the determination to go to phase 2.
So I'm already actually working on that from a request from Board Member Crossett, who wanted to see the cost by schools, having the self-contained student units pulled out so you can see the difference. And so I started working that already, and we'll give it to you when I get it done.
Perfect.
Board Member Lundy.
I just wanted to make sure I was clear on what was getting assigned to policy committee, particularly with respect to the evaluation conversation at the beginning. I'd like to advocate pretty strongly that not get farmed out to a committee, whether it's policy or any committee, because I think what we hold the superintendent accountable for really is a full board responsibility. If there's some work that needs to happen with a smaller number of board members between now and the next meeting to facilitate getting to closure, I'm very happy to play a role in that. I'm happy to do that with anybody who's on policy or not on policy, but it used to be the case that the eval was done by a student achievement committee I think it's bad. I think it's should be our job together, but I'm happy to volunteer to play a role between now and the next meeting if that's helpful. I also don't need to. If somebody else wants to carry this forward, I can just vote. But I just wanted clarity on what the request was going to be and who is going to do what.
That sounds fair. Board Member Crossett?
Yeah, I'm happy to help Ben since I created that spreadsheet, so happy to help you.
So Member Crossett and I will have something to share with the board for the next board meeting that we have.
That sounds good. And you two just happen to be on policy, right?
We don't, he does not.
Oh, you're not on policy? Okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, this is the policy side. Okay, I got you. All right.
Do that in collaboration with the superintendent as the policy stands.
That sounds good. All right. And Vice President Bolton?
Yeah, a follow-up doesn't need to be written in stone, but a follow-up on reviewing this issue of attendance boundary lines and some of the adjustments that could be made along the way as this transition continues to happen. See where you all are on thinking about that.
Board Member Mack? That was it?
Yes, and so specifically as it pertained to Woodford as well as Taft Elementary, about the boundaries and transportation.
Could you say that a little bit louder? I couldn't hear you.
So yes, needing or wanting information, yes, about boundaries, but specifically as it pertains to Woodford as well as Taft Elementary and how that connects to their transportation.
That it? That was going to be part of mine. I would like some research on and data around the grandfathering of transportation. I know that we talked about that. I've made that request as well, specifically around Taft Elementary, but that was going to be one of mine. And I would also like the engagement schedule for those particular schools that are the middle schools that we've now approved principals for. There's only 2, so what is their engagement schedule that's looking like? I'd like to know that. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Oh, Board Member Weinberg?
I just wanted to make sure if we could get an update regarding my busing question for the schools to see if the mileage or whatever would work, or how many students are affected by that as we're making the changes for the different schools for the upcoming school year.
And so just so that board members are aware, there is an assignment log. When and the administration is putting the assignments on the log and the person who asks it, I'm going to suggest that the person who asks the question is the one who decides whether or not the assignment is complete, not the administration, because there's been a couple of concerns around clarifying the question, and the administration thinks that the question is complete, but the board member hasn't seen that. So board members, I'm going to ask you to look at the assignment sheet, get make sure that your questions are answered if you put an assignment out there, and then ask that all of the responses are sent to all of the board members so that they can get an idea of when that's completed, and then I don't have to be the mediator in between that. Are there any other questions? The chair will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So